It was the summer of 2017 when I decided to take a solo road trip from my home in Seattle to visit some friends in a small town in Northern California. I'd done road trips before, but this time I was craving solitude and adventure. I packed my car, filled it with snacks, and hit the road, feeling a mix of excitement and freedom. The first few days were nothing short of perfect. I drove along the Pacific Coast Highway, the ocean on one side and rugged cliffs on the other. I stopped frequently, taking pictures of breathtaking views and exploring small coastal towns. I felt invigorated, alive. However, as I left the coast and ventured inland toward my destination, the scenery changed dramatically. The landscape became more arid, with sprawling fields and scattered farms. The highway was a long, straight stretch, flanked by occasional clusters of trees. The further I drove, the more desolate it became. I began to feel isolated, but I shrugged it off. After all, that was part of the adventure. It was late afternoon when I crossed into California. I decided to take a less traveled back road instead of the main highway, hoping to discover some hidden gems along the way. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden glow over the landscape. I felt a thrill as I turned onto a narrow, winding road that cut through the dense trees and hills. At first, everything seemed fine. I rolled down the windows, enjoying the warm breeze and the scent of pine. However, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the atmosphere began to shift. The trees loomed overhead, their twisted branches casting eerie shadows across the road. I was in the middle of nowhere, and I had no cell service. The realization made my stomach churn, but I pressed on, convinced I'd find my way back to civilization soon. Then, out of nowhere, I heard a strange noise, a low, almost rhythmic sound that seemed to echo through the woods. I turned down the radio, trying to listen more closely. It wasn't music or any kind of engine noise. It was more like chanting or murmuring. I shook my head, trying to dismiss it as my imagination playing tricks on me. As I drove deeper into the woods, the noise grew louder, filling my car with an unsettling hum. It seemed to pulse with the rhythm of my heartbeat. I started to feel anxious, glancing around as shadows danced along the edges of the road. The trees felt too close, too oppressive, and I regretted not sticking to the main highway. I decided to stop and take a break. I pulled over to the side of the road, turned off the engine, and stepped out into the cool evening air. The noise faded slightly, but the silence that followed felt even more unnerving. I took a few deep breaths, trying to calm myself, when I noticed something strange in the underbrush just off the road. It looked like a small, weathered sign, partially buried in the dirt. Curious, I walked over to inspect it. The sign read, "Camp Marrow," in faded letters, along with an arrow pointing deeper into the woods. A chill ran down my spine. I didn't remember seeing anything about a camp on my map, and the name felt off, uninviting. I turned to head back to my car when I heard it again. The chanting, louder now, almost as if it was calling me. I froze, feeling a shiver crawl up my spine. The sound seemed to be coming from deeper in the woods, and I felt an inexplicable pull toward it. I stood there for a moment, torn between my curiosity and the instinct to flee. In the end, curiosity won. I cautiously made my way toward the noise, the underbrush crackling beneath my feet. The chanting grew louder, becoming more distinct, almost like voices. I could make out words now, but they were in a language I didn't recognize. My heart raced as I crept closer, the trees seeming to close in around me. Then, suddenly, I stumbled into a clearing. The sight before me froze me in place. A group of people, 10 or 12, stood in a circle, their backs turned to me. They were dressed in dark, tattered clothing. and their arms swayed rhythmically as they chanted. The flickering glow of a fire illuminated their faces, which were painted in grotesque masks made of bark and mud. I felt a rush of fear, realizing that I had intruded on something sacred, something I didn't understand. I wanted to turn and run, but my feet felt rooted to the ground. The energy in the air was thick, charged with an intensity that made my skin crawl. I couldn't take my eyes off them, drawn in by the surreal scene. Just then, one of the figures turned slightly, revealing a weathered face with deep-set eyes that seemed to bore into my soul. In that moment, I felt a surge of panic and instinctively took a step back. The figure's head snapped toward me, and the chanting stopped. Silence enveloped the clearing, thick and suffocating. "Who are you?" A voice rang out, deep and gravelly. I stammered, unsure of what to say. I was just passing through," I managed to say, my heart pounding in my chest. The figure stepped closer, and the others began to turn, their eyes narrowing as they regarded me. The air felt heavy with anticipation, and I could sense the tension building. "You shouldn't be here," the voice said, more firmly now. "This is sacred ground." "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to intrude," I replied, backing away slowly. One of the other figures, a woman with wild hair and an unsettling grin, stepped forward. "You've heard the call, haven't you?" she said, her voice sing-song. "The forest has chosen you." My heart raced as I felt the blood drain from my face. The chanting had felt like a siren song, pulling me in. "No, I just want to leave," I blurted out, panic rising in my throat. But they didn't move. They stood there, watching me, as if waiting for something to happen. The man who had spoken first stepped forward again, and I could see the sharpness of his features, the intensity of his gaze. "You can't leave. You've been marked." Before I could process what that meant, I turned and ran, sprinting back through the trees and into the darkness. I could hear them behind me, their voices echoing through the night, chanting something I couldn't understand. I didn't stop to look back. Adrenaline fueled my escape. I stumbled through the underbrush, my heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't hear the chanting anymore, but I felt their presence lingering, felt their eyes on me, even as I fled. I didn't stop until I reached my car, throwing myself inside and locking the doors. My hands shook as I fumbled for the keys and started the engine. I pulled out onto the road, heart racing, and didn't stop until I hit the main highway. The normalcy of the highway lights felt like a relief, and I forced myself to breathe deeply, trying to calm my racing heart. The rest of the drive was a blur. I kept looking in my rearview mirror, half expecting to see those figures emerging from the woods, watching me as I sped away. I finally made it to the town I had planned to stay in, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me. As I checked into the motel, the clerk gave me a strange look, but I didn't care. I just wanted to get to my room and lock the door. I took a shower, scrubbing my skin as if that would wash away the feeling of being marked, but it lingered. I tried to sleep, but every sound made me jump. Every shadow felt threatening. The next morning, I woke up exhausted, feeling like I hadn't slept at all. I tried to shake off the unease and went to a local diner for breakfast, hoping to clear my mind. As I sat there, sipping my coffee and scrolling through my phone, I noticed something strange. My phone was full of notifications, but none of them were from my contacts. Instead, they were messages and alerts from random numbers, all with strange symbols and incoherent phrases. A chill ran down my spine. I quickly powered off my phone and shoved it into my bag, but the feeling of being watched returned, more intense than ever. I finished my meal quickly, paid the bill, and left, desperate to put distance between myself and whatever had happened the night before. I decided to continue my trip, but every mile felt heavy with the memories of that clearing. I avoided back roads, sticking to well-traveled highways, but the paranoia never left me. I would often catch glimpses of shadows moving just outside my line of sight, and I felt the weight of unseen eyes on me, even when I was surrounded by strangers. A week passed, and I finally made it to my friend's town. They welcomed me with open arms, but I found it hard to enjoy their company. I shared stories of my trip, omitting the details of that night in the woods. I couldn't bring myself to relive it, and I didn't want to scare them. Instead, I focused on being present, hoping to shake off the lingering dread. But the sense of unease continued to haunt me. I couldn't help but feel that the forest had marked me in some way, that whatever had happened was far from over. I found myself avoiding dark places, and I couldn't sleep without a light on. One night, I went for a walk to clear my head. The town was small and quiet, but I felt restless. As I wandered the streets, I found myself near the edge of a nearby forest. It looked inviting in the soft glow of the streetlights, but I felt a pull toward it, a familiar whisper that echoed in my mind. Before I knew it, I was standing at the tree line, peering into the darkness. The memories flooded back, the chanting, the figures in the clearing. I hesitated, feeling the weight of the decision before me. I could either turn back to the safety of my friends or venture into the unknown once more. As I stood there, a voice called out from the trees. "Come back to us," it whispered, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I turned on my heel and ran back to the town, heart racing, not daring to look back. After that night, I decided it was time to go home. I packed my bags and made the long drive back to Seattle, sticking to the main roads and avoiding any isolated areas. But even then, I couldn't escape the feeling that something was watching me. The drive felt endless, and every time I stopped for gas or food, I felt eyes on me. When I finally pulled into my driveway, I was relieved to be home. But that relief was short-lived. That night, I lay in bed, trying to convince myself that everything was fine. But the whispers returned. They echoed in my mind, urging me to return to the woods, to the clearing, to the chant that had haunted me since that night. I didn't know if I was going crazy or if there was truly something dark lingering in my life. But the fear was real. Weeks turned into months, and I tried to go back to my normal routine. I avoided the woods and back roads, but the memories haunted me. It felt like a shadow followed me, whispering secrets I didn't want to hear. Then, one day, I received a package at my doorstep. Confused, I opened it to find an old, weathered book. It was a journal filled with entries about the history of Camp Merrow. My heart dropped as I recognized the name. The journal detailed rituals, chants, and practices that took place in the clearing. It spoke of a connection to something ancient, something dark. The final entry made my blood run cold. The forest calls to those who are lost. It whispers their names, marking them for a purpose only the trees understand. I felt sick to my stomach, and tears pricked my eyes. That night, I tossed and turned, the journal resting heavily on my nightstand. I finally gathered the courage to open it again, reading through the entries in a panic. I learned that those who were marked could never truly escape. The forest would always find a way to draw them back. Over the next few days, I became increasingly paranoid. I couldn't sleep, and shadows seemed to dance around me in every corner of my house. I felt the whispers more than ever, filling my mind with fear and uncertainty. I knew I had to confront whatever was haunting me. I decided to return to that road, that clearing. It was the only way to face the fear that had taken root in my life. With trembling hands, I packed my car and drove toward the woods, determination battling against fear. As I approached the area, memories flooded back. The chanting, the figures. I parked my car and stepped out, heart racing as I walked into the forest. The trees loomed overhead, blocking out the sunlight, and the air felt thick with anticipation. I reached the clearing, and to my shock, it was exactly as I remembered it. The fire pit was still there, and the signs of the previous gathering lingered in the air. The atmosphere was electric, and I could feel the whispers returning, echoing in my ears. "Come back," they urged. "Come back to us." Panic surged through me, but I forced myself to stand my ground. I shouted into the emptiness, "I'm not afraid of you." My voice echoed through the clearing, and for a moment, silence hung heavy in the air. Then, the figures emerged from the trees, just as I had seen them before. My heart raced as I recognized the same man and woman from that night. They stepped forward, and I could feel their energy pulsing around me. "You've returned," the man said, his voice deep and resonant. "You are marked, and we have been waiting." I felt a surge of defiance. "I'm not here to join you. I want to break free from this." The woman laughed softly, the sound sending chills down my spine. "You can't escape what is meant to be. The forest has chosen you." With that, they began to chant again, the rhythm pulsing in the air. I felt the ground tremble beneath my feet, and the shadows danced closer, enveloping me in darkness. I took a deep breath and closed my eyes, focusing on the strength within me. "No, I refuse to be a part of this," I shouted, and the energy shifted. The chanting grew louder, but I pushed against it, determined to break free. In that moment, I felt a surge of light radiating from within me, pushing back against the darkness. The chanting faltered, and the figures hesitated, uncertainty flickering in their eyes. "You have a choice," the man said, his voice a mixture of anger and awe. "You can join us, or you can be lost forever." I felt the weight of their words pressing down on me, but I stood my ground. "I choose my own path." The energy surged, and with a final burst of willpower, I shouted, "I am not yours." The clearing erupted in a blinding light, and the figures began to dissolve into shadows. The last thing I saw was the man's face, twisted in fury, before everything went white. When I opened my eyes, I was back in my car, parked on the side of the road. The sun was shining, and the world felt normal again. I sat there, trembling, realizing I was free. The whispers had faded, and the shadows had lifted. I drove away, never looking back. The forest had tried to claim me, but I had fought back. I would carry the scars of that experience with me, but I had emerged stronger. From that day on, I avoided dark places and back roads. I embraced the light, cherishing every moment I had. And as the years passed, I often reflected on that trip, grateful for the lessons learned in the depths of fear. Some roads lead to darkness, but others lead to freedom. I had chosen my own path, and that was the most powerful choice of all. I'll never forget that summer of 2018 when I decided to embark on a solo road trip across the American Southwest. At the time, I was a 25-year-old woman seeking adventure and a break from the routine of my office job. I had a brand new car, a map loaded with destinations, and an unquenchable thirst for exploration. What started as a journey of self-discovery would soon morph into a nightmare that would haunt me forever. I planned my route meticulously, starting from Denver and making my way down through New Mexico, Arizona, and into California. The thrill of driving through the open roads, surrounded by breathtaking landscapes, filled me with joy. My first stop was Santa Fe, where I marveled at the art scene and unique adobe architecture. After a couple of days, I hit the road again, heading toward Albuquerque. As I drove, the landscape shifted dramatically from mountains to sprawling deserts, and I felt invigorated by the freedom of the open road. I stopped frequently to take pictures, savoring the beauty around me. The vastness of the desert was mesmerizing, and I found myself in a state of blissful solitude, the kind that only a road trip can provide. By the time I reached Albuquerque, it was late afternoon, and I was eager to explore the city. I spent the day wandering through local markets, trying delicious New Mexican cuisine, and soaking in the vibrant culture. When night fell, I decided to drive a little outside the city to find a quiet place to camp under the stars. I found a small camping area in the Sandia Mountains, nestled among the pines. The night sky was clear, and the stars sparkled like diamonds against the backdrop of the dark expanse. I set up my tent and started a small campfire, feeling content and peaceful. As I sat there, listening to the crackle of the fire, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It was a strange sensation, but I attributed it to being in the wilderness alone for the first time. That night, as I crawled into my sleeping bag, I tried to push away the unease. I was exhausted from my travels and quickly fell asleep. However, I was jolted awake in the middle of the night by a noise. It was faint, but it sounded like footsteps crunching on leaves outside my tent. My heart raced as I strained to listen, trying to discern if it was just an animal or something more sinister. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. No response, just the whispering wind and the rustling of leaves. I told myself it was probably a deer or some other harmless creature. I lay back down, trying to convince myself I was just imagining things. But sleep eluded me as I lay there, wide awake and on high alert. Hours later, the noise returned, but this time it was accompanied by something else, muttering, soft and unintelligible, like someone was speaking in hushed tones nearby. I sat up abruptly, my heart pounding in my chest. I reached for my phone to check the time, and the screen illuminated my tent. It was just after 3 a.m. I cautiously unzipped the tent flap, peeking outside. The fire had died down to embers, casting eerie shadows around the campsite. In the dim light, I could see a figure standing near the tree line, shrouded in darkness. I squinted, trying to get a better look, but my heart raced and panic set in. "Who's there?" I shouted, trying to sound brave, but failing miserably. The figure didn't move. Instead, the muttering grew louder, and I could finally make out a few words. "It's not safe. You shouldn't be here." I felt a chill run down my spine. Adrenaline kicked in, and I scrambled back into my tent, zipping it up tight. I held my breath, listening intently as the muttering continued, mixed with the sound of soft footsteps. My mind raced with thoughts of what to do next. Should I pack up and leave? Or should I wait it out until morning? Then, to my horror, I heard a scratching sound at the tent. It was gentle at first, then grew more insistent, as if something was trying to get in. I pressed my back against the tent wall, panic flooding my senses. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a message from a friend checking in on me. I couldn't risk making a sound, so I silenced it and focused on my breathing. Minutes felt like hours as the scratching continued. I wanted to scream, but the thought of attracting attention kept me silent. Just as I thought it couldn't get any worse, I heard a voice, clear and chilling, just outside my tent. "Let me in. I need help." It sounded like a woman, but there was an edge to her voice that made my blood run cold. I could feel tears welling in my eyes. "I can't help you," I whispered back, my voice shaky. The scratching stopped, and for a moment, there was silence. Then the voice returned, this time more urgent. "Please let me in. I'm scared. They're coming for me." I didn't know who they were, but I wasn't about to find out. I was frozen in fear, too terrified to move or respond. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the voice faded into the night, and the scratching ceased. I remained on high alert, my senses heightened, waiting for the slightest sound. The rest of the night was a blur of fear and anxiety, and I hardly slept. As dawn broke, I cautiously unzipped the tent and peeked outside. The campsite was empty, and the morning sun illuminated the trees, casting away the shadows of the night. Relieved but still shaken, I quickly packed my things, eager to leave the campsite behind. I was still unnerved by the previous night's events, and as I drove back down the mountain, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Once I hit the highway, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. I drove toward my next destination, determined to shake off the fear and enjoy the adventure. However, as the day went on, I couldn't help but feel unsettled. I kept glancing in my rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone following me. The road wound through the desert, and I stopped at a small diner for lunch. It was a typical roadside stop, with a few locals chatting and a couple of truckers eating at the counter. I ordered a burger and fries, trying to distract myself from the lingering dread. While I waited for my food, I struck up a conversation with the waitress, an older woman with kind eyes. I mentioned my camping trip and the strange events of the previous night. She listened intently, her expression shifting to concern. "You shouldn't be camping out there alone," she said. "That area has a reputation. Strange things happen in those woods. You might want to be careful." Her words sent a chill down my spine. "What do you mean?" I asked, my curiosity piqued. She leaned in closer, her voice low. "They say there are spirits in those woods. People have gone missing over the years, and there are whispers of rituals and things that shouldn't be disturbed." I felt a lump form in my throat. "That's just an old wives' tale, right?" She shook her head. "No, honey, it's real. If you feel like you're being watched, trust your instincts. Some things are best left alone." I forced a smile, but inside I was trembling. I paid my bill and left the diner, my mind racing with fear. The waitress's words echoed in my head as I drove away, the unease creeping back in. After that, I made a conscious effort to stay in populated areas. I avoided camping and chose motels instead, hoping the presence of others would keep me safe. I visited some beautiful sights, like the Grand Canyon and Sedona, but my sense of adventure had been overshadowed by the fear that clung to me. One night, as I settled into my motel room, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I pulled the curtains tight and locked the door, reminding myself that I was safe. But as I lay in bed, the memory of that voice haunted me. Days passed, and I finally reached my last stop before heading home, a small beach town in California. I thought maybe the ocean breeze and warm sun would wash away the lingering dread. I checked into a beachfront motel and headed straight for the sand. As I walked along the shore, the waves crashing against the rocks, I felt a sense of calm. I stopped to take pictures of the sunset, and for a brief moment, everything felt right. But just as I began to relax, I noticed something in the distance. A figure stood on the beach, staring out at the ocean. I squinted, trying to get a better look. It was a woman, her hair blowing wildly in the wind. There was something haunting about her, and as I drew closer, I felt a shiver run down my spine. When I reached her, I saw that she was staring out at the water, lost in thought. "Are you okay?" I asked gently. She turned to me, her eyes wide and glassy. "They're coming for me," she said, her voice trembling. A wave of recognition washed over me. She looked like the woman from my tent. I felt my heart race. "What do you mean? Who's coming for you?" "The shadows," she whispered, glancing nervously over her shoulder. "I can feel them. They won't let me go." I stepped back, the reality of my nightmare crashing down on me. "You need to get away from here," I urged. "You can't stay." As I spoke, the shadows began to creep in from the edges of the beach, darkening the sand. Panic surged through me as I realized this was no ordinary encounter. I turned to run, but the shadows surged closer, wrapping around my feet, pulling me toward the water. I fought against them, struggling to break free, but they were relentless. The woman stood there, watching in horror as I was drawn into the darkness. I reached for the shoreline, but the more I fought, the tighter they gripped me. "Help!" I screamed, but my voice was swallowed by the sound of crashing waves. Just as I felt myself being pulled under, a blinding light erupted from the ocean, illuminating the darkness. The shadows recoiled, releasing their grip on me. I gasped for air as I was thrown back onto the shore. I lay there, trembling and disoriented. The woman had vanished, and the beach was eerily quiet. I looked around, confused, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The ocean glimmered under the moonlight, but I felt the weight of dread pressing down on me. I stumbled to my feet and ran back to the motel, my heart racing. I locked the door behind me, the sound of the ocean fading into the background. I tried to convince myself that it was just a nightmare, but deep down, I knew something was very wrong. That night, sleep was impossible. I could hear whispers in the darkness, echoes of the woman's voice, and the murmurs of the shadows. I felt trapped, as if they were waiting for me to let my guard down. The next morning, I packed my things and checked out, my hands shaking as I handed over the key. I couldn't get out of that town fast enough. As I drove away, I felt a sense of relief wash over me, but I knew I could never escape the experiences that had plagued me. I took the long way home, avoiding any isolated roads and camping spots. I stayed in hotels with other travelers, hoping the presence of others would keep me safe. Weeks passed, and I finally returned to Denver, but the shadows lingered in my mind. I tried to resume my normal life, but the unease never fully left me. I often replayed the events of that trip in my mind, questioning what I had experienced. Was it all in my head, a product of exhaustion and fear? Or was there something darker at play, something I had stumbled into unknowingly? One night, as I lay in bed, I heard a familiar whisper, just like the one in the woods. "You can't escape us." I bolted upright, my heart racing. From that day on, I knew I could never truly shake the shadows. They would always be a part of my story, a reminder of the night I ventured too close to the darkness. Though I try to move on, I am forever haunted by the memories of that road trip, the woman on the beach, the whispers in the dark, and the shadows that threatened to pull me under. Every time I step outside, I can't help but feel the weight of their gaze, a lingering reminder that some roads lead to places best left unexplored. I still crave adventure, but I've learned that not all journeys are worth taking. Some paths are best avoided, and some shadows never fade. I've always been a road trip kind of guy. There's something about the open road that calls to me. The sound of tires humming on the asphalt, the wide, expansive skies, and the never-ending horizon. It's freedom, pure and simple. I've driven across nearly every state in the U.S. over the past 15 years. always taking different routes, seeing new places, and meeting new people. Some of those trips have been breathtaking, others a bit dull, but none of them has ever haunted me like the journey I took along Highway 50 in Nevada a few years back. I'd read about Highway 50 before. It's often referred to as the loneliest road in America. It stretches through miles of barren desert, dotted with tiny towns that feel like they're frozen in time. I figured it would be the perfect route for a solo adventure. I packed up my old Jeep, threw in a cooler full of snacks and drinks, and headed west from Denver. I was excited. It was late summer, the weather was perfect, and the long, empty road ahead felt like an invitation to disconnect from the world and just be. The first couple of days were amazing. The drive was smooth, the scenery stark but beautiful in its own way, and I loved the sense of isolation. There's a unique stillness in the desert. No sound but the wind and the occasional chirp of insects. By day 3, I was deep into Nevada. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the landscape, and I hadn't seen another car for what felt like hours. The plan was to drive until I reached Ely, a small town that promised a warm bed and some hot food. But as the darkness started to settle in, something strange happened. My GPS cut out. I wasn't surprised. I'd read that this area had spotty reception, so I had an old-fashioned paper map just in case. What did surprise me, though, was the unsettling feeling that crept into my chest as the sky grew darker. There was no moon that night, and without the usual glow of city lights in the distance, the desert around me felt empty. Too empty. I shrugged it off, cranked up the music, and kept driving. About an hour later, my headlights illuminated something ahead on the road, a figure standing by the side of the highway. At first, I thought it was a deer or some other animal, but as I got closer, I realized it was a man hitchhiking. Now, I know the golden rule of solo road trips. Don't pick up hitchhikers, especially not on lonely desert roads in the middle of the night. But something about him gave me pause. He wasn't your typical drifter. He looked out of place. He was wearing a black leather jacket and jeans, his hair slicked back like he'd stepped straight out of a 1950s movie. There was no backpack, no sign that he'd been out walking in the desert. He just stood there, casually, one hand raised with his thumb out. I don't know why I stopped. I'm usually smarter than that. Maybe it was the eerie stillness of the night, or maybe it was the way he looked at me as I drove by, his eyes catching the light from my headlights in a way that made my stomach twist. I pulled over. The man approached the passenger side of my Jeep, and I rolled down the window a crack, keeping my foot on the brake. "Where are you headed?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He smiled, and for a split second, I regretted stopping. There was something off about his smile. It was too wide, too friendly, like he knew something I didn't. His eyes were dark, almost black, and they seemed to shimmer in the dim light. "Just up the road," he said, his voice smooth and calm. "You mind giving me a lift?" Everything in my gut screamed to drive away, but my hands were frozen on the wheel. Against my better judgment, I unlocked the door, and he climbed in. The first few minutes were silent. He didn't say much, and I didn't know what to say either. The atmosphere inside the Jeep felt heavy, like the air had thickened somehow. I glanced at him out of the corner of my eye. He was just staring out the window, watching the desert pass by, his hands resting calmly in his lap. Finally, I broke the silence. "So, where exactly are you headed?" He turned to me, that strange smile still on his face. "I'll let you know when we get there." I didn't like that answer. I didn't like it at all. We drove on for what felt like hours, but when I checked the clock, only 10 minutes had passed. Time felt distorted, stretched. I couldn't shake the sense that something was terribly wrong. The road ahead seemed to stretch on forever, the desert around us an endless sea of black. "Are you from around here?" I asked, trying to fill the silence. The man didn't respond at first, just kept staring out the window. Then, without turning to look at me, he said something that sent a chill down my spine. "I've been around these parts for a long time, a very long time." His voice had changed. It was lower now, almost a whisper, and there was something unsettling about the way he said it. I tried to laugh it off, but it came out shaky. "Oh yeah? Must get pretty lonely out here." He finally turned to face me, and for the first time since he'd gotten in the car, I saw his eyes clearly. They weren't just dark, they were black, completely black, like two endless voids staring back at me. My heart skipped a beat, and I nearly slammed on the brakes. "It does," he said softly, "but not tonight." I could feel my pulse quicken, my palms slick with sweat. Every instinct was telling me to get this guy out of my car, but my body wouldn't respond. It was like I was stuck in some sort of trance, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly, my knuckles turned white. And then he started to talk. Quietly at first, but his voice grew louder as he spoke. He told me stories about the desert, about people who had disappeared out here, lost to the sands, never to be found. He spoke of ancient spirits, of restless souls wandering the highways, hitchhiking their way into the lives of unsuspecting travelers. I wanted to tell him to stop, but the words wouldn't come. I could only listen, my eyes fixed on the road ahead, my mind racing with terror. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he stopped talking. The silence in the car was deafening. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. And then, as suddenly as he'd appeared, the man spoke again. "This is my stop," he said, his voice calm and even. I looked around, but there was nothing. No town, no buildings, just the endless desert stretching out in every direction. I swallowed hard and pulled over, my hands shaking as I gripped the wheel. The man opened the door and stepped out, but before he closed it, he leaned back in, his face inches from mine. "Thanks for the ride," he said, that strange smile still plastered on his face. "Drive safe now." With that, he slammed the door shut, and I watched in the rearview mirror as he walked off into the desert, disappearing into the night. I sat there for a long time, my heart racing, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Eventually, I put the Jeep in gear and drove off, my hands still trembling. When I reached Ely later that night, I checked into a motel and locked the door behind me, my mind still reeling. I didn't sleep at all that night. I couldn't stop thinking about the man, about his eyes, about the stories he'd told, about the way he'd vanished into the desert like he'd never existed at all. The next morning, I asked the motel clerk if anyone else had reported seeing a hitchhiker along Highway 50. He just laughed. "Out here? Not likely," he said. "This stretch of road's been pretty quiet for years. You're more likely to run into a ghost than another driver." I didn't tell him what had happened. I didn't tell anyone. But I still think about that night sometimes, especially when I'm out on the road. I still drive across the country, but I've never taken Highway 50 again. Maybe it was just my imagination, or maybe there was something more to that man than I'll ever understand. All I know is that I'll never forget those black eyes staring back at me, and the way the desert seemed to swallow him whole. Some roads are lonely for a reason, and some rides are better left unoffered. There are some trips you never forget. Some moments on the road that stick with you, nagging at your mind, unraveling bits of your sanity. What happened to me in the fall of 2018 still haunts me, and I haven't spoken about it to many people, mostly because I'm afraid they'll think I'm insane. But I know what I experienced was real. I've driven thousands of miles across the US in my time, been to the strangest little corners of the country, but I've never had an encounter quite like the one that happened during that trip. It started like any other long-haul drive. I was heading from Seattle to visit family in Colorado. My Jeep packed with a few essentials, snacks, a couple of maps in case I lost GPS, and my sleeping bag. The route was a familiar one, but this time, I decided to take a detour through the more scenic byways. I'd been on this solo road trip kick lately, trying to find myself, or whatever cliché phrase fits that midlife itch. I didn't mind being alone on the road. It gave me time to think, to listen to old playlists, and sometimes just soak in the silence. It was October. The air was crisp, and the leaves had begun to turn a deep orange and red. I was cruising through eastern Oregon, the sun hanging low on the horizon, casting everything in a golden glow. The land there feels ancient, like it's seen too much, and the small towns are spaced so far apart, it's easy to feel like the only person left on the planet. I had planned to make it to Boise before dark, but I was making good time and decided to push a little farther. It was a decision I would regret. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the terrain became more desolate. I found myself driving down a long, straight stretch of road, nothing but vast fields on either side, the occasional abandoned farmhouse dotting the landscape. There was an eerie stillness to the night. Even with the windows cracked open, there wasn't a single sound. No insects, no wind, nothing. Just the hum of my engine and the sound of the tires rolling along the cracked asphalt. Around 9 p.m., I noticed a sign up ahead, worn and faded. It read, "Rest stop, 5 miles," with an arrow pointing off the main highway. I hadn't seen a rest area in a while, and I figured I could use a quick break to stretch my legs and maybe grab a nap before continuing on. The turnoff was easy to miss. Just a small, narrow road, lined with tall, overgrown weeds that seemed to reach out as I passed. The road twisted through a thicket of dead trees and scrubby brush, winding deeper into what felt like nowhere. After about 10 minutes, the headlights illuminated an old 2-story building, a motel. It looked like it had been there forever, weathered and sun-bleached. There were a couple of dim neon lights still flickering above the entrance, but otherwise, the place seemed deserted. A rusted sign out front read, "The Silent Motel, Vacancy." I should have turned around right then. I should have driven back to the highway and kept going. But my body was heavy with exhaustion, and my brain was fogged from the hours of driving. Against my better judgment, I pulled into the gravel parking lot. There were only 2 other cars parked there, both covered in a layer of dust so thick it was clear they hadn't been moved in a while. The building's exterior had the same neglected look. The paint was peeling, windows were grimy, and weeds had overtaken most of the property. But I figured it was just another rundown roadside motel, and that's not unusual for these parts. So I grabbed my bag, stepped out of the Jeep, and headed inside. The lobby was small, lit by a single buzzing fluorescent light. It smelled like mildew and old wood, and there was a layer of dust on the counter that suggested no one had been through here recently. Behind the counter sat an old man, hunched over, staring at a black and white TV set that flickered with static. He didn't look up when I entered. "Excuse me," I said, my voice sounding oddly loud in the silence. "You got a room for the night?" The man's eyes slowly shifted from the TV to me, but his expression didn't change. He seemed wrong. His skin was pale, almost translucent, and his eyes were sunken deep into his skull. He was wearing a plaid shirt, buttoned all the way to the top, and it looked about 2 sizes too big for him. After an awkward pause, he nodded once and reached under the counter, pulling out a key on a thin metal ring. "Room 9, he croaked, his voice as dry and cracked as the desert outside. I took the key, muttered a quick "thanks," and hurried out of the lobby, eager to be away from him. The hallway leading to my room was dim, lit only by a few weak bulbs hanging from the ceiling. The carpet squished under my boots, damp with who knows what, and the air was thick with a musty odor. Room 9 was at the far end of the hall. I unlocked the door, pushing it open with a creak that echoed in the empty corridor. The room was as grimy as the rest of the place. The wallpaper was peeling, and the bed was covered with a thin, stained blanket. There was a single lamp on the nightstand, casting a weak yellow glow. The window was small, grimy, and faced the parking lot. I could see my Jeep parked below, and beyond it, nothing but the dark expanse of the empty road I'd come from. I dropped my bag on the bed, sat down, and stared at the old rotary phone on the nightstand. It looked like something straight out of the 1960s. I picked up the receiver, and of course, there was no dial tone. No cell service either. Not that I was surprised. I wasn't sure what I'd been expecting, but this was worse than I'd imagined. Still, I figured I'd rest for a couple of hours, maybe get some sleep, and then get back on the road. I kicked off my boots, laid down on the creaky bed, and stared at the ceiling, my mind drifting in and out of thoughts. The silence in the room was unnerving. I could hear my own heartbeat, the faint sound of my breathing, and nothing else. Not a single sound from outside. It was like the world had been swallowed by the night. I must have dozed off at some point, because the next thing I remember was waking up to a soft sound, a shuffle, like someone was moving in the hallway outside my door. I sat up, suddenly alert, my heart racing. The clock on the nightstand read 2:14 a.m. I listened carefully. There it was again. Slow, deliberate footsteps moving down the hall. I felt a chill creep up my spine. I hadn't seen or heard any other guests since I arrived, and the place had felt completely deserted. The footsteps stopped directly outside my door. I held my breath, waiting. There was a soft tap, like fingers lightly brushing against the wood. Then another tap, this one louder. My heart was pounding in my chest now, and I felt a wave of dread wash over me. Whoever was out there wasn't knocking. They were just tapping. I got up slowly, careful not to make a sound, and tiptoed over to the door. I pressed my ear against it, straining to hear any movement outside. There was nothing, just silence. Suddenly, the door rattled, like someone was trying the handle. I jumped back, my pulse racing. Whoever it was out there was trying to get in. I grabbed my phone and checked it again. Still no service. I cursed under my breath, feeling a rising sense of panic. I wasn't armed. I didn't even have a knife, just my car keys and a flashlight in my bag. I could feel my hands trembling as I stood there, listening to the door rattle, the handle turning ever so slightly, but not opening. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The footsteps moved away, slowly down the hall. I stood frozen in place, my mind racing. I thought about leaving, but the idea of running into whoever, or whatever, was out there in that narrow hallway filled me with dread. I spent the next few hours sitting on the edge of the bed, my eyes fixed on the door, listening for any sound. But the tapping didn't return. The silence stretched on, and eventually, the pale light of dawn crept through the dirty window. I didn't waste any time. As soon as the sky began to brighten, I grabbed my bag, threw on my boots, and bolted for the door. The hallway was empty, just as grimy and dim as before, but there was no sign of anyone else. The lobby was the same, dusty, silent, and abandoned. The old man was gone, and the TV that had been playing static all night was now off, the screen black. I tossed the room key on the counter and walked outside into the crisp morning air. The sky was overcast, a heavy layer of gray clouds hanging low over the barren landscape. My Jeep was still there, sitting in the same spot I'd left it. I climbed in, started the engine, and pulled out of the lot without looking back. As I drove away, I felt a strange sense of relief, like I'd narrowly escaped something terrible. I made it back to the main highway and didn't stop driving until I reached Boise later that day. It wasn't until I got home a few days later that I started thinking more about that motel. Something about it had been gnawing at me, an uneasy feeling I couldn't shake. I tried looking it up online, but there was no trace of the silent motel. No reviews, no mentions, nothing. It was like the place didn't exist. I even went through old maps of the area, trying to figure out where exactly I'd stayed, but the road I'd turned down wasn't on any of them. I don't know what I encountered that night, but I'm certain of one thing. I wasn't alone in that motel. Something else was there, something that still makes my skin crawl when I think about it. Since then, I've taken a lot of road trips, but I've never stayed in a motel again. The open road still calls to me, but there are some places I'll never visit again. Some roads, some detours. They lead to places we're not meant to find, and I've learned the hard way that not every stop along the road is a place you're supposed to stay. I've always been drawn to road trips. There's something about the open highway, the way the miles disappear behind you, and the feeling of heading toward the unknown. Most of my trips have been uneventful, even peaceful, a chance to disconnect and just enjoy the solitude of the road. But one trip changed all of that for me. It's the kind of experience that makes you question everything, that leaves a stain on your memories you can't wash away. It was the summer of 2019, right before everything in the world turned upside down. I'd been living in New York City for almost a decade, and the city had started to wear on me. The constant noise, the crowds, the endless hustle, it was all getting to be too much. I decided to take a break, pack up my car, and drive cross-country to visit my sister in Los Angeles. She'd been bugging me to come out for years, and I figured it was the perfect excuse for a change of scenery. I'd made the trip out west before, but this time I wanted to take a different route, explore some of the lesser-known highways, and avoid the major interstates as much as possible. I mapped out a route that would take me through some of the most remote parts of the country, places where I could drive for hours without seeing another car or person. The first few days were perfect. The weather was clear, the roads were quiet, and I found myself losing track of time as I passed through small towns, forests, and long stretches of desert. I'd camped out under the stars a couple of nights, stayed in the occasional cheap motel, and generally just enjoyed the solitude. Then I hit Utah. I've always loved the stark beauty of the Utah desert, those massive red rock formations that seem to rise out of nowhere, the endless stretches of highway that make you feel like you're the last person on Earth. I was driving down a particularly isolated road, Route 191, heading south toward Moab, when I noticed something strange in the distance. At first, it just looked like a dark shape on the side of the road, maybe an animal or some debris. But as I got closer, I realized it was a person. Now, I've driven through some pretty remote places before, and it's not uncommon to see hitchhikers or people whose cars have broken down. But there was something about this person that immediately made my stomach knot up. It was a man, standing perfectly still by the side of the road. He wasn't hitchhiking, though. He didn't have his thumb out, and there was no broken-down car nearby. He was just standing there, staring straight ahead, not even looking at me as I approached. As I passed him, I slowed down slightly, trying to get a better look. He was wearing a black hoodie and jeans, both of which seemed too heavy for the desert heat. His hood was pulled up over his head, casting his face in shadow, but I could tell that his skin was pale, unnaturally pale, like he hadn't seen the sun in years. I kept driving, telling myself it was just some guy who'd gotten lost or was waiting for someone to pick him up. But something about the way he stood so still, so lifeless, gnawed at me. I glanced in my rearview mirror, and that's when the real fear set in. He was gone. I'm not talking about fading into the distance as I drove away. He was gone. Completely. In the split second between passing him and checking my mirror, he had vanished. My heart started racing, and I had to fight the urge to slam on the brakes. I took a deep breath and tried to think logically. Maybe he'd stepped off the road and into the brush. Maybe there was a dip in the ground I hadn't noticed. But when I looked again, there was no sign of him, no movement, no dark shape in the distance. Just the empty road stretching out behind me. I pressed down on the gas and kept driving, my eyes glued to the rearview mirror for the next few miles. Eventually, the landscape changed. The sun began to set, and I tried to convince myself that it was all in my head. The desert can play tricks on you. Long drives can make you see things that aren't there. I reached Moab just after dark and checked into a small motel on the edge of town. It was the kind of place where the neon sign buzzes faintly, and the rooms haven't been updated since the 70s, but I didn't care. I was just happy to be off the road. I grabbed some fast food, headed back to my room, and tried to shake off the weird encounter from earlier. After a hot shower, I felt more relaxed and convinced myself that the guy had just ducked out of sight as I passed him. But that night, I couldn't sleep. It wasn't the usual tossing and turning. I felt watched, like someone was standing just outside my door, waiting. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him, standing perfectly still by the side of the road, his face hidden under that hood. I couldn't shake the feeling that he had followed me, somehow. At around 3 a.m., I finally gave up on sleep and decided to get back on the road. I figured the sooner I put some distance between myself and that spot, the better. I threw my bags in the car, checked out of the motel, and headed south toward Arizona. The road was pitch black, the only light coming from my headlights and the stars overhead. About an hour into the drive, I started to calm down. The strange anxiety I'd felt earlier was beginning to fade, and I told myself I was just being paranoid. But then, in the distance, I saw him again. That same figure, standing by the side of the road. I slammed on the brakes, my heart hammering in my chest. It couldn't be him. It didn't make sense. I'd driven hundreds of miles since I'd seen him last, and yet there he was, standing just as still, just as pale, just as motionless. I sat there in my car, my headlights illuminating his figure. He didn't move. He didn't acknowledge my presence. It was as if he was waiting for something. I thought about turning around, heading back to Moab, or even going off-road to avoid passing him. But something inside me told me that wouldn't work. He would still be there, waiting for me, no matter which direction I went. I took a deep breath, tightened my grip on the steering wheel, and slowly pressed down on the gas. As I drove closer to him, I kept my eyes locked on the road ahead, refusing to look directly at him. But as I passed, I could feel his presence, like a weight pressing down on the car. The air felt thick and heavy, and a cold shiver ran down my spine. My instincts screamed at me to keep going, to get as far away from him as possible. But then, something strange happened. My car's radio, which had been off since I left Moab, suddenly crackled to life. Static filled the speakers, followed by a faint voice. It was so soft, so distant, I could barely make it out. But there was no mistaking it. It was him. "Stop the car." The voice was barely a whisper, but it cut through the static like a knife. I felt my hands tremble on the wheel, my heart pounding in my chest. Every part of me wanted to slam on the gas and speed away. But I was frozen. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. "Stop the car." This time the voice was louder, more insistent. The static grew louder, filling the car with a deafening roar. I gritted my teeth and shook my head, trying to break free from whatever hold this thing had on me. "Stop." I reached down and ripped the radio knob off, silencing the voice. The static disappeared, and for a moment, the only sound was the hum of the engine and the wind rushing past the windows. But I knew he was still out there, watching me, waiting. I drove for hours, not stopping once, until I finally reached Flagstaff, just after sunrise. I was exhausted, my body aching from the tension, but I couldn't stop. I checked into another motel, this one a bit nicer than the last, and collapsed onto the bed. My hands were still shaking. I couldn't get his voice out of my head. I stayed in Flagstaff for 2 days, trying to gather myself, trying to convince myself that I'd imagined the whole thing. I didn't see him again during that time, but the feeling that he was still out there, somewhere, never left me. Every time I stepped outside, I half expected to see him standing there, waiting for me. On the 3rd day, I got back on the road. I couldn't hide forever, and I had to make it to Los Angeles. I took a different route this time, avoiding the highways and sticking to back roads, trying to convince myself that I was safe. But deep down, I knew the truth. I wasn't. The last night of my trip, I stopped at a small gas station just outside Barstow, California. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the desert, and I felt that familiar sense of dread creeping back in. As I filled up my tank, I glanced around, my eyes scanning the horizon. And there he was, standing by the side of the road, just beyond the gas station, his hood pulled up over his head, his pale skin glowing faintly in the fading light. My heart stopped. He wasn't supposed to be here. He couldn't be here. But there he was, as real as anything I'd ever seen. I jumped into my car, not even bothering to finish filling up the tank, and peeled out of the gas station. I didn't care where I was going. I just needed to get away. But as I sped down the highway, the radio crackled to life again. "Stop the car!" I couldn't outrun him. I don't know what he wanted, or why he was following me. But I knew, in that moment, that he would never stop. No matter where I went, no matter how far I drove, he would always be there, waiting for me by the side of the road. And one day, I would have to stop. Road trips are supposed to be freeing, right? You're on the open highway, no deadlines, just you, your car, and the world unfolding before you. That's what I thought too. For years, I romanticized the idea of just packing up and driving, seeing America's heartland, exploring forgotten towns, and getting lost in the beauty of the country. In the summer of 2020, after months of lockdown, I finally decided to do it. I'd been cooped up in my tiny Brooklyn apartment for too long. I needed to clear my head, escape the city, and reconnect with nature, with life outside of concrete and steel. My plan was to take a 2-week trip, driving from New York to the Pacific coast. I wasn't in a rush, so I picked a route that would let me stop in some of the quieter, less traveled areas of the country, places where I could camp under the stars, avoid people, and just be alone with my thoughts. The first leg of the trip went well. I cut through Pennsylvania, took my time wandering through the Allegheny National Forest, then moved on into Ohio and Indiana. By the time I hit the Midwest, the flatness of the landscape was almost hypnotic. Miles and miles of empty fields, long stretches of road with hardly any cars. It was exactly what I wanted. Solitude, wide open spaces, and the endless horizon ahead of me. It wasn't until I crossed into Kansas that things started to feel off. I'd been driving along Route 36, a lonely two-lane highway that cuts through the northern part of the state. It was the kind of road where you could drive for hours without seeing another soul, just the occasional farmhouse or broken-down barn in the distance. The sky was overcast that day, a thick layer of clouds hanging low over the plains, making everything feel muted and strange. I hadn't seen another car for miles, which was weird, even for a rural highway. Then I saw the sign. It was an old, rusted thing, barely legible, sticking out of the ground by the side of the road. Hollow Creek, 12 miles, it said, with an arrow pointing off to a narrow, barely visible road that branched off from Route 36. I slowed down, staring at the sign as I passed it. I hadn't planned on stopping in Kansas, but something about the name Hollow Creek caught my attention. I don't know why, but I felt drawn to it. Maybe it was the isolation that intrigued me. Maybe it was just curiosity. But whatever it was, I found myself turning off the highway and heading down that narrow road. The first thing I noticed was how quiet it was. The hum of the tires on the road seemed to be swallowed up by the landscape, leaving an eerie silence in its place. The fields on either side of me stretched out endlessly, the tall grass swaying gently in the wind. There were no houses, no farms, no signs of life at all. Just that empty road winding ahead, disappearing into the distance. After about 10 minutes, I started to wonder if I'd made a mistake. My GPS wasn't showing any town called Hollow Creek, and there hadn't been any signs since I'd turned off Route 36. I considered turning back, but something in me, maybe stubbornness, maybe that same strange curiosity, kept me going. Another few minutes passed, and I saw it. A small cluster of buildings in the distance, barely visible through the haze. As I got closer, I realized it wasn't a town so much as a collection of old, weather-beaten structures. The road led directly into the heart of it, where a single faded sign stood on the edge of what could loosely be called the main street. "Welcome to Hollow Creek," it read in peeling white letters. The town, or what was left of it, was tiny. There were maybe a dozen buildings, all of them in various states of disrepair. The largest one, which looked like it might have been a general store at some point, had its windows boarded up, and the paint on the walls was faded and cracked. Across the street was an old gas station, the pumps long since rusted over, and the roof partially caved in. The other buildings were just as decrepit. Small houses, a diner that had probably been closed for decades, and a church with a steeple that leaned at an alarming angle. The whole place looked like it had been abandoned for years, if not longer. I pulled over in front of what used to be the general store and stepped out of the car. The air was heavy, thick with the smell of dust and decay. I looked around, half expecting to see someone, but the streets were empty. There were no sounds, no birds, no insects, nothing but the faint rustle of the wind through the tall grass. I walked down the main street, my footsteps echoing in the silence. I peered into the windows of the diner. Dust-covered tables, chairs knocked over, a counter that looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. I passed by the gas station, the pumps standing like rusted sentinels guarding nothing. It was unsettling, to say the least. As I walked farther down the street, I noticed something strange. In the middle of the road, half buried in the dirt, was a piece of clothing. A jacket, to be precise. It was old, torn, and covered in dust, but it was unmistakably modern. I picked it up, examining it. It wasn't the kind of thing that had been lying there for decades. It looked like it could have been there for only a few days. A chill ran down my spine, and I dropped the jacket, suddenly feeling uneasy. Why would there be a modern jacket in a town that looked like it had been abandoned for years? I glanced around, and for the first time since I arrived, I felt like I was being watched. I told myself it was just my imagination, that the isolation and decay were getting to me. But I couldn't shake the feeling. The silence seemed oppressive now, like the entire town was holding its breath, waiting. I hurried back to my car, my heart pounding in my chest. As I climbed in and shut the door, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. I froze, my hand halfway to the ignition. Someone was standing in one of the windows of the church. It was just a shadow, barely visible through the cracked glass, but there was no mistaking it. There was a person standing there, watching me. I started the car and backed out of the parking spot, my eyes locked on the church window. The figure didn't move, didn't react. They just stood there, unmoving, watching as I pulled away. I drove back down the narrow road, faster this time, my mind racing. Who was that? Why were they there? And more importantly, why hadn't I seen any sign of life until that moment? I made it back to Route 36 without incident, but the feeling of unease stayed with me. I couldn't stop thinking about the figure in the church, the modern jacket, the eerie silence that had swallowed the entire town. I kept driving west, telling myself I was just being paranoid, that it was all just a creepy coincidence. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. Something about Hollow Creek had gotten under my skin, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. That night, I checked into a small motel in western Kansas, just outside of Goodland. It was a typical roadside place, cheap, a little dingy, but clean enough. I figured a good night's sleep would help me shake off the weirdness of the day. But sleep didn't come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that figure standing in the church window, watching me. I tossed and turned for hours, my mind replaying the events of the day, trying to make sense of it. At some point, I must have drifted off, because the next thing I knew, I was waking up to a loud banging sound. I sat up in bed, my heart racing. The room was dark, the only light coming from the neon sign outside my window, casting an eerie red glow on the walls. I listened, holding my breath. The banging came again, louder this time, like someone was knocking on the door. I got out of bed, my legs shaky, and approached the door. I hesitated for a moment, then slowly opened it. No one was there. The hallway was empty, silent except for the low hum of the vending machine at the end of the hall. I stepped out, looking around, but there was no sign of anyone. I shut the door and went back to bed, telling myself it was just a dream, that I'd imagined the whole thing. But I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The next morning, I got back on the road, eager to put as much distance between myself and Hollow Creek as possible. But as I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone, or something, following me. By the time I crossed into Colorado, I was exhausted, both physically and mentally. I stopped at a diner in a small town near the border, hoping a hot meal and some coffee would help me feel better. As I sat at the counter, sipping my coffee and trying to clear my head, I struck up a conversation with the waitress. She was an older woman, probably in her 60s, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. I mentioned that I'd driven through northern Kansas, and her expression changed instantly. "You didn't happen to pass through Hollow Creek, did you?" she asked, her voice suddenly serious. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. "Yeah," I said slowly. "How did you know?" She shook her head, her eyes narrowing. "You're lucky you made it out of there. Most people don't." I stared at her, not sure if she was joking or not. "What do you mean?" She leaned in closer, lowering her voice. "That town, it's cursed. People go in, but they don't come out. Not all of them, anyway. The ones that do, they're never quite right after." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What are you talking about?" She glanced around the diner, as if checking to make sure no one was listening. "I don't know the details, but there's something wrong with that place. Always has been. Some say it's the land, some say it's something else, but whatever it is, people vanish there. And those that don't, they're never the same." I didn't know what to say. My mind was racing, trying to process what she was telling me. Was this some kind of local legend? A ghost story? Or was there something more to it? Before I could ask her any more questions, the door to the diner opened, and a man walked in. He was tall, with a scruffy beard and a weathered face, the kind of guy who looked like he'd spent his whole life working on a farm or ranch. He walked straight to the counter, ignoring me, and ordered a coffee. As the waitress poured his cup, she leaned over to me and whispered, "That's John. He lost his brother in Hollow Creek 20 years ago. Went in to look for him and barely made it out alive. You should talk to him." I wasn't sure if I wanted to, but my curiosity got the better of me. After the man finished his coffee, I approached him cautiously. "Excuse me," I said, trying to sound casual. "I heard you know something about Hollow Creek." He turned to me slowly, his eyes narrowing as he looked me up and down. For a moment, I thought he wasn't going to answer. Then, he nodded. "My brother disappeared there," he said quietly. "Went looking for him, but there was nothing. Just empty streets and silence. It's like the town swallowed him whole." He looked away, his face hardening. "You're lucky you got out," he said. "Most people don't." I didn't ask any more questions after that. I finished my meal, paid my bill, and left the diner, my mind spinning with everything I'd heard. I haven't been back to Kansas since, and I have no intention of ever going near Hollow Creek again. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm lying in bed, I think about that figure in the church window, watching me as I drove away, and I wonder how many others weren't as lucky. I've never been the type to scare easily, and that's what makes what I'm about to tell you even harder to swallow. I've always loved the road. Driving is my therapy, a chance to clear my mind, to just be alone with my thoughts and the hum of the engine. I've done cross-country road trips more times than I can count, and I've driven through some of the most remote and desolate areas the US has to offer. But this time was different. This time, something happened, something I can't explain and still struggle to come to terms with. It was early October 2020. The pandemic had kept me grounded for most of the year, but I finally decided to hit the road again. I'd been working remotely, so I thought, why not? I could take my laptop, stay in motels, and just drive. It felt like a perfect escape from the monotony of lockdown life. The plan was simple: drive from my home in Northern California to Denver, Colorado, taking the scenic route through Nevada, Utah, and the Rockies. I wasn't in a rush. I had all the time in the world. For the first few days, everything was perfect. The weather was clear, the roads were mostly empty, and I had my music and podcasts to keep me company. I'd stop in small towns along the way, grab a bite, and chat with the occasional local who wasn't too paranoid about COVID. It was exactly the kind of trip I'd been craving. The trouble started on the fourth day. I was in Utah, driving through one of those vast, empty stretches where the road seems to disappear into the horizon. There were no cars, no houses, nothing but miles of barren desert and rocky outcrops. The sun was starting to set, casting a reddish glow over the landscape. I had about 2 hours of daylight left and planned to stop in a small town called Green River for the night. I was about 50 miles out when I noticed something strange. Up ahead, maybe a mile or so down the road, there was a car pulled off to the side. At first, I didn't think much of it. People break down all the time in the middle of nowhere, and I've had my fair share of roadside assistance calls. But as I got closer, I realized there was something off about the car. It was an old model, maybe from the 1970s or 80s, a dusty blue sedan with a rusty exterior. The kind of car you don't see much of anymore, especially not on long stretches of highway like this. The windows were rolled up, and there was no sign of movement inside. The car wasn't parked in a typical breakdown position either. It was angled oddly, with the front end facing toward the road, like someone had stopped in a hurry. No hazards were on, no signs that anyone was trying to flag down help. As I passed, I slowed down to get a better look. The car was empty. That's when I noticed the shoe. It was lying in the dirt, just a few feet from the driver's side door. A single, old-looking boot, worn and scuffed, like it had seen better days. It was facing the road, and something about it made my stomach churn. I kept driving. I'm not proud of it. Usually, I'd stop and see if someone needed help, especially in a place like this, where cell service was spotty. But something about that car and that shoe sent a shiver down my spine. I told myself someone must have just left it there, maybe gone for a walk or hitched a ride with a passing truck. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. About 15 minutes later, the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky turned a deep shade of purple. I was still a good 30 miles from Green River, and the road had grown even more desolate. No other cars, no lights, just the endless stretch of highway and the shadows creeping in around me. Then, out of nowhere, my headlights flickered. It was brief, just a second or two, but enough to make me take my foot off the gas. My heart skipped a beat as I watched the road ahead, waiting for them to go out completely. They didn't, but I was on edge now. It was getting dark, and the last thing I needed was car trouble in the middle of nowhere. I pressed the gas again, but a few miles later, it happened again. This time, the lights dimmed and then brightened, like something was messing with the electrical system. I checked the dashboard, but everything seemed normal. No warning lights, no sign that anything was wrong with the car. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something in my rearview mirror. There, in the distance, was another pair of headlights. But they weren't coming from behind me. They were on the opposite side of the road, far in the distance, heading my way. I felt a strange sense of relief. At least I wasn't completely alone out here. Maybe it was a truck or another car making its way toward Green River. But as the lights grew closer, I realized something wasn't right. The headlights weren't moving like a car's would. They weren't steady. Instead, they flickered, like they were bouncing or swaying side to side, and they were coming toward me fast. Too fast. I slowed down, gripping the steering wheel tighter. my eyes fixed on those erratic lights. They were zigzagging across the road, sometimes veering off into the dirt, sometimes coming dangerously close to the center line. And then, just as they were about to pass me, they disappeared. 1 second, they were there, and the next, gone. No car, no lights, nothing. I slammed on the brakes, skidding to a stop in the middle of the road. My heart was racing, and I could barely catch my breath. I checked the mirrors, looked over my shoulder, but there was nothing behind me. Nothing in front of me either. Just the empty road and the darkness all around. For a moment, I sat there, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. Maybe it was some kind of optical illusion, I told myself. Maybe the car had turned off the road and I just hadn't seen it. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. I started driving again, slower this time, my nerves on edge. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that I was being watched, followed even. Every few minutes, I'd glance in the mirror, half expecting to see those lights again. But there was nothing. Just the dark, empty road stretching out behind me. By the time I reached Green River, it was late, and the small town was eerily quiet. I found a motel on the edge of town, the kind of place with flickering neon lights and a half-empty parking lot. I parked the car, grabbed my bag, and checked in without saying much to the guy at the front desk. All I wanted was a hot shower and a bed. But sleep didn't come easily that night. My mind kept replaying the events of the day, the strange car, the flickering headlights, the feeling of being watched. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd see those lights coming toward me, swerving wildly before disappearing into the night. The next morning, I felt a little better. Daylight has a way of making everything seem less frightening, and I chalked up the previous night's events to exhaustion and nerves. I grabbed some coffee at a local diner, filled up the tank, and got back on the road. For the next couple of hours, everything was fine. I drove through the mountains, enjoying the crisp autumn air and the stunning scenery. But as I made my way deeper into Colorado, something strange happened again. My GPS lost signal. Now, this wasn't completely unexpected. I was driving through a remote area with spotty cell service, so I wasn't too concerned at first. But after a while, the road I was on didn't match the map on my phone. According to the GPS, I was supposed to be on a major highway, but the road I was driving on was narrow, winding, and completely empty. I tried restarting my phone, but nothing changed. The GPS kept showing me on a different route, and there were no signs or mile markers to tell me where I was. It was like I'd taken a wrong turn somewhere, but I didn't remember turning off the main road. I kept driving, hoping to find a sign or a gas station where I could stop and ask for directions. But the farther I went, the more desolate the landscape became. The mountains loomed large on either side of me, and the road twisted and turned through narrow passes and steep cliffs. There were no other cars, no buildings, no signs of life at all. That's when I saw the car. It was parked on the side of the road, just ahead of a sharp bend. At first, I thought it was abandoned, but as I got closer, I realized there was someone inside. A man, slumped over the steering wheel. My heart skipped a beat as I slowed down and pulled over behind him. I hesitated for a moment, my hand on the door handle. Part of me wanted to just keep driving, but I couldn't leave someone out here if they were in trouble. I stepped out of the car and approached the vehicle cautiously. The man didn't move as I got closer. His car was an old beat-up model, maybe a 90s sedan, covered in dust and dirt. The windows were rolled down, and the inside of the car looked like it hadn't been cleaned in years. Empty fast food bags, crumpled cigarette packs, and old clothes were strewn across the seats. I knocked on the window, but the man didn't respond. "Hey," I called out, my voice shaky. "Are you okay?" No response. I took a step closer, peering through the window, and that's when I saw it. The man wasn't slumped over the wheel. He was dead. His skin was pale, almost gray, and his eyes were wide open, staring straight ahead. There was dried blood on his shirt, and his hands were clenched tightly around the steering wheel, as if he'd been holding on for dear life. I stumbled back, my heart racing, and ran to my car. I didn't stop to think. I didn't call the police. I just got in, slammed the door, and sped off, my tires kicking up dust as I flew down the road. I didn't stop driving until I reached Denver, hours later. When I finally checked into a hotel, I collapsed onto the bed, shaking and exhausted. I don't know how long I lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of what had happened. I never reported the body. I never told anyone about the strange lights, the dead man, or the feeling that something had been following me. Maybe it was fear, or maybe I just didn't want to admit that something unexplainable had happened. But I can't forget it. The road, the lights, the man slumped over the wheel. It's all burned into my memory, and no matter how hard I try, I can't shake the feeling that whatever it was that happened out there isn't over yet. To this day, I avoid that stretch of road. I stick to well-traveled highways and try not to drive at night anymore. But sometimes, late at night when I'm alone in my car, I can't help but check the rearview mirror. And every now and then, I swear I see those lights again, flickering in the distance, chasing me through the darkness. As the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, I found myself on the open road, driving through the desolate stretches of Texas. I had just finished a long week at work and decided to take a solo road trip to clear my mind. My destination was Big Bend National Park, a place I had longed to visit, filled with sprawling desert landscapes and stunning mountains. What was supposed to be a liberating adventure quickly turned into a harrowing experience that I would never forget. The drive was long, but the scenery was captivating. I had my favorite playlist blasting through the speakers, and the rhythmic sound of the tires against the asphalt lulled me into a sense of freedom. I stopped at a small diner about halfway through my journey for some comfort food, burgers and fries. The diner was quaint, filled with local memorabilia, and the elderly couple running it was friendly. As I enjoyed my meal, I struck up a conversation with them. "Where are you headed?" the old man asked, wiping his hands on a grease-stained apron. "Big Bend National Park," I replied, smiling. "I've always wanted to see it." "Ah, that's a beautiful place," he said, nodding. "But be careful out there. The nights can get eerie, and you never know who or what might be lurking around." I chuckled, thinking he was just trying to spice up a mundane conversation. "I'll be fine, just me and the stars." The couple exchanged a knowing glance, and the woman chimed in. "Just remember, not all who wander are lost, but some who wander into those parts never come back. It's a big, wild place." Their warnings felt like a strange mix of concern and folklore, but I brushed it off. After finishing my meal, I thanked them and hit the road again, eager to reach my destination before sunset. As I drove deeper into Texas, the landscape changed. The sprawling flatlands gave way to rugged hills and rocky outcroppings. I rolled down the windows to let in the fresh air, feeling invigorated. However, as twilight approached, I began to feel an unsettling tension in the air. The vast desert was beautiful, but it also felt isolating, as if I were the only person for miles. The once welcoming expanse now felt ominous. By the time I reached the park entrance, the sun had fully set, and darkness enveloped everything. I parked my car and took a moment to soak it all in. The stars were out in full force, twinkling brightly against the night sky. I had planned to set up camp at a nearby site, but the air felt heavy, almost suffocating. I hesitated, but decided to stick to my plan. Driving to the campground, the road narrowed, and the shadows of the mountains loomed over me. I finally found a spot, and after setting up my tent, I built a small campfire to ward off the encroaching chill. The crackling flames provided some comfort as I sat there, roasting marshmallows and staring up at the stars. For a moment, I forgot about the unsettling feeling that had been creeping up on me. But as the fire died down and the night deepened, I began to hear sounds in the distance. Soft whispers, almost indistinguishable. I attributed it to the wind and the rustling of the leaves. Still, unease settled in my stomach as the whispers seemed to grow louder, rising and falling like a strange melody. I tried to ignore it and crawled into my tent, zipping it up tight. I reminded myself that I was just being paranoid, but sleep eluded me. I lay there, staring at the fabric of the tent, listening to the whispers, which now seemed to be right outside. Suddenly, I heard a soft tapping on the tent wall. My heart raced as I froze, straining to hear more. It sounded like fingers brushing against the fabric. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. No response, just the whispers fading into silence. After what felt like hours, I mustered the courage to unzip the tent and peek outside. The moonlight illuminated the campsite, revealing nothing but the flickering embers of my campfire. I felt foolish for letting my imagination run wild, so I climbed back into my sleeping bag and tried to push the anxiety away. But the whispers returned, more insistent this time, and I realized they were calling my name. "Come out. Come play." The voices were ethereal, almost childlike, echoing through the trees. My instincts screamed at me to stay inside, but curiosity got the better of me. I unzipped the tent again and stepped outside. "Hello?" I called out again, but the only response was the rustling of leaves in the night breeze. I felt a mix of fear and intrigue, a primal urge pulling me deeper into the woods. I knew it was a bad idea, but something compelled me to follow the voices. As I ventured further from the campsite, the trees closed in around me, the shadows growing thicker. The whispers became clearer, calling to me, beckoning me to come closer. "We're waiting for you. Join us." With every step I took, I felt a disorienting mix of fear and exhilaration. It was as if the woods were alive, drawing me in with their secrets. I pushed aside the thought that I might be walking into danger. I was an adventurous spirit after all. Suddenly, the whispers stopped. I stood in a clearing, the moonlight illuminating a small, dilapidated cabin. It was an odd sight, so out of place in the vast wilderness. The door creaked open slowly, as if inviting me in. My heart raced, and I hesitated. Common sense told me to turn back, but the allure of the unknown was too powerful. I stepped forward, crossing the threshold into the dark cabin. The air was thick with dust and decay. Old furniture lay scattered about, and the walls were lined with faded photographs. I could barely make out the faces in the images, but they all seemed to be staring at me, watching. As I moved further into the cabin, I felt an overwhelming sense of dread wash over me. Something was wrong. So wrong. I turned to leave, but as I stepped back toward the door, I heard a voice behind me. "Why are you leaving? You've only just arrived." I spun around to face a figure in the shadows. A woman stood there, her eyes wide and hollow, her expression a mixture of sadness and anger. "You're not supposed to be here," she said, her voice a haunting whisper. My heart raced as I backed away. I was just exploring," I stammered, my instincts screaming at me to run. "Exploring? Or trespassing?" she replied, her tone shifting. The shadows seemed to swirl around her, dark and suffocating. "They've been waiting for you." I turned to flee, my heart pounding in my chest. I stumbled out of the cabin, the door slamming shut behind me. The whispers returned, rising in a cacophony of voices, echoing my name. "Come back. Don't leave us." I sprinted through the woods, the trees seeming to close in on me, blocking my path. The darkness felt alive, wrapping around me like a suffocating shroud. I finally burst through the tree line and collapsed at my campsite, gasping for breath. The campfire had burned down to embers, but I quickly reignited it, feeling the flickering light ward off the shadows. I threw my gear into my car, hands trembling as I tried to gather my thoughts. I had to leave. I couldn't stay here another moment. As I drove away from the park, the memories of that night replayed in my mind. The whispers, the cabin, the woman's haunting gaze, they lingered in the corners of my consciousness. I tried to shake off the fear, telling myself it was just a bad dream. But deep down, I knew something more sinister was at play. Weeks passed, and I returned to my normal life in the city, but the experience never left me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the woman in the shadows, and every whisper in the wind brought me back to that night. I tried to talk about it with friends, but their laughter and disbelief made me feel even more isolated. One evening, while scrolling through social media, I stumbled upon a news article that made my blood run cold. It detailed a string of disappearances in and around Big Bend National Park over the past few decades. Some of the missing had been last seen near a cabin deep in the woods. The article included old photographs, and to my horror, one of the images showed the very cabin I had stumbled upon. I felt a chill run down my spine as I read about the eerie legends surrounding the area. Locals spoke of a spirit that lured unsuspecting travelers to their doom, and the stories echoed the whispers I had heard. The more I read, the more I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. Haunted by that night, I became consumed with finding answers. I researched the history of Big Bend, combing through articles, folklore, and even reaching out to locals. Each story added to my growing dread, painting a picture of a dark presence that resided in the park. One night, I found a forum where people shared their own experiences in Big Bend. Many recounted similar encounters, whispers in the woods, figures watching from the shadows, and inexplicable feelings of dread. It was a chilling confirmation that I wasn't alone in my experience, but it also deepened my fear. Months went by, and I found it increasingly difficult to shake off the feeling that I was being watched. I would often glance over my shoulder, half expecting to see the woman from the cabin or hear the whispers calling my name. I even avoided driving at night, the memories of that trip still fresh and terrifying. One day, I decided to visit a therapist, hoping to find some peace of mind. During our sessions, I shared my experiences and fears, and she listened attentively. After a few weeks, she suggested a form of exposure therapy, encouraging me to confront my fears directly. "Perhaps you should go back to the park," she said gently. "Face what happened there." The thought terrified me, but deep down, I knew I couldn't keep running. I agreed to make the trip again, promising myself I would be prepared this time. I packed my bags, feeling a mix of dread and determination as I drove back to Big Bend. When I arrived, the park felt different. The air was heavy with anticipation, and the shadows seemed to stretch longer than before. I set up my tent and built a fire, trying to calm my nerves. As night fell, I steeled myself, reminding myself that I was no longer the frightened traveler I once was. But as darkness settled in, the whispers returned, echoing through the trees. "Join us. Come play." They seemed to swirl around me, pulling me toward the woods. This time, I stood my ground, refusing to let fear take hold. I called out into the darkness, "I'm not afraid of you." My voice trembled, but I stood firm, waiting for a response. The whispers ceased, and an eerie silence enveloped me. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I kept my gaze fixed on the trees. Moments later, I saw a flicker of movement, shadows dancing just beyond the tree line. The figure emerged, and my heart raced as I recognized the woman from before. She stood at the edge of the clearing, her hollow eyes fixed on me. "Why do you return?" she asked, her voice soft, but laced with an otherworldly echo. "I'm not afraid of you," I shouted, forcing my voice to remain steady. "Fear binds you to this place," she replied, stepping closer. "You must let go." I felt an overwhelming urge to run, but I stood my ground. "What do you want from me?" She reached out, her fingers brushing the air between us. "You were chosen to remember. The whispers guide you, but you must decide your own path." With that, she began to dissolve into the shadows, her form fading away. I felt a rush of wind around me, the whispers rising again, but now transforming into a single voice, a melodic tune that resonated deep within me. I took a deep breath, feeling a strange sense of calm wash over me. The darkness around me felt less threatening, as if I were being offered a choice rather than being hunted. I understood now that my fears had given the shadows power over me, but I could break free. As the sun began to rise, the whispers faded, replaced by the soft sounds of the waking desert. I packed my things, leaving the campsite behind with a sense of closure. I had faced the shadows and come out stronger on the other side. Driving back home, I felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted. The journey had changed me, revealing the power of fear and the strength of facing it. I knew that the whispers would always be a part of my experience, but they no longer held me captive. In the years since that night, I often think back to Big Bend and the woman in the shadows. It became a tale I shared with friends, a reminder of the importance of confronting our fears and finding our own paths, even in the darkest of places. While the echoes of that experience still linger, I've learned that sometimes the shadows can teach us more than the light ever could. I had always been an avid road tripper, seeking the thrill of the open road and the freedom it promised. After years of dreaming about it, I finally decided to take a solo journey across the United States, aiming to capture the beauty of the country through my camera lens. My route was loosely planned, taking me through national parks, small towns, and anything that caught my eye. Little did I know that this trip would lead me down a path I would never forget, a path filled with terror and mystery. The trip began on a warm July morning. I packed my trusty old Subaru with camping gear, a cooler full of snacks, and my camera equipment. My first destination was the Grand Canyon, a place I had longed to see. The excitement pulsed through me as I pulled out of my driveway, leaving behind the hustle and bustle of everyday life. I had a playlist ready, classic rock and country songs, to accompany me on the journey. The first few days were a blur of scenic views and picturesque sunsets. I stopped at every quirky roadside attraction I could find, snapping photos of everything from giant dinosaur statues to historical markers. The freedom was intoxicating, and the miles seemed to melt away beneath my tires. But as I traveled further into the desert regions of the Southwest, I started to feel a subtle shift in the atmosphere. The vast stretches of emptiness began to weigh on me, a sense of isolation creeping in as the towns grew scarcer and the landscapes more desolate. After leaving the Grand Canyon, I decided to head towards a lesser-known park, Petrified Forest National Park in Arizona. The route took me along an isolated stretch of highway, with not much more than sand and rock for miles. As I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The desert was eerie, the silence deafening, and the emptiness felt suffocating. I brushed off the feeling, attributing it to fatigue and the remoteness of the area. It was late afternoon when I finally reached the park. The colorful rock formations and petrified trees were breathtaking, and I spent hours exploring, completely lost in the beauty of the landscape. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I decided to set up camp just outside the park. There was a small camping area nearby that promised a peaceful night under the stars. That night, I cooked a simple meal over the campfire, enjoying the solitude. As the sky darkened, I couldn't help but feel a sense of tranquility. The stars above sparkled like diamonds, and I felt a deep connection to the universe. But as I sat there, a chill crept in, and the whispers of the wind seemed to carry something ominous. I tried to shake it off, convincing myself that it was just the desert night playing tricks on my mind. I crawled into my tent and fell asleep quickly, lulled by the sounds of nature. However, my peaceful slumber was short-lived. I awoke to the sound of rustling outside my tent. My heart raced as I strained to listen, the noise persistent and unsettling. It sounded like footsteps, but heavier, like something, or someone, was circling my camp. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. No response. I reached for my flashlight, illuminating the inside of the tent, and tried to calm my racing heart. The rustling stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. I lay there, unable to move, too scared to unzip the tent and see what was outside. Minutes felt like hours, and just as I thought I could finally relax, I heard a low growl, deep and menacing. Panic surged through me. Whatever was outside was not friendly. I held my breath, straining to hear any further sounds. The growl came again, closer this time, and I felt the unmistakable weight of dread settle over me. In a moment of desperation, I flicked on my flashlight and unzipped the tent, just a crack. Peering out, I saw nothing but darkness. I took a deep breath, my mind racing through possibilities. Was it a bear, a coyote, or something else entirely? Suddenly, I noticed movement on the edge of the campsite, a dark figure standing just beyond the glow of the firelight. I gasped, my heart pounding in my chest. The figure was tall and hunched, its features obscured by shadows. I couldn't make out any details, but something about it felt wrong, unnatural. It seemed to sway slightly, as if caught in a dance with the wind. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice wavering. The figure froze, and in that moment, I regretted saying anything at all. It was as if I had awakened something that should have remained asleep. Then, the figure turned, revealing a glimpse of its face, a gaunt, pale visage with hollow eyes that seemed to glow in the dark. I felt a surge of primal fear wash over me, and without thinking, I scrambled back into the tent and zipped it up tightly. My breath came in shallow gasps as I fought to quiet my racing heart. For the next few hours, I lay awake, terrified of what lurked outside. The creature, or whatever it was, had not made another sound, but I could feel its presence, hovering just beyond the edges of my perception. I could hardly sleep, dreading the dawn that seemed so far away. As the first light of day crept into the sky, I finally felt safe enough to emerge from my tent. I slowly unzipped it and peeked outside, half expecting to see the figure still standing there. To my relief, the campsite was empty, the only evidence of the night being the charred remains of my campfire and the soft rustle of the wind through the trees. I quickly packed my things, eager to leave the unsettling campsite behind. As I drove away, the memory of the figure haunted me. Was it a figment of my imagination, a trick of the light, or something more sinister? I needed to shake it off, so I focused on my next destination, a small town called Winslow. After a few hours of driving, I arrived in Winslow and stopped at a diner to grab breakfast. The atmosphere inside was warm and inviting, a stark contrast to the eerie night I had just experienced. I settled into a booth and ordered a stack of pancakes. As I waited, I struck up a conversation with the waitress, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes. "You're not from around here, are you?" she asked, wiping down the table. "No, I'm just passing through," I replied. "I camped out at Petrified Forest last night." Her expression changed slightly, a flicker of concern crossing her face. "That place can be dangerous at night," she said quietly. "You never know what might be out there." I felt my stomach drop as I recalled the figure. "Yeah, I had a strange experience," I admitted. "What do you mean?" she asked, leaning closer. I hesitated before recounting the events of the night, the rustling, the growl, the figure. As I spoke, the waitress's expression grew more serious. "You're not the first to say something like that," she replied. "There are stories about that area, people disappearing or encountering strange things. It's best to stay on the main roads." Her words sent a chill down my spine, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I had stumbled upon something much darker than I could understand. After finishing my meal, I decided it was best to continue my journey and put some distance between myself and the park. As I drove along Route 66, I tried to shake off the lingering fear. The road was beautiful, with nostalgic signs and quirky attractions dotting the landscape. However, the further I drove, the more I felt an unsettling presence, as if something was watching me from the shadows. Late in the afternoon, I decided to take a detour and visit a small roadside attraction called the Route 66 Museum. The museum was housed in a vintage gas station and promised a glimpse into the history of the iconic highway. I thought it would be a fun way to distract myself from the lingering unease. Inside the museum, the atmosphere was nostalgic, filled with memorabilia and artifacts from the golden age of road travel. I wandered through the exhibits, enjoying the stories of travelers who had come before me. However, as I explored, I couldn't shake the feeling that the air was charged with tension. In one corner of the museum, I noticed an old, dusty journal displayed behind glass. Curiosity piqued, I approached it and read the inscription. The journal belonged to a traveler who had disappeared while on a road trip in the 1970s. As I flipped through its pages, I felt an eerie sense of déjà vu wash over me. The last entry was dated the night before the traveler vanished. "They are watching me," it read. "The whispers in the night grow louder, and I feel their presence closing in. I must leave this place before it's too late." I shuddered as I closed the journal, realizing how similar my experiences were to those of the long-lost traveler. My heart raced as I considered the possibility that I might be following in their footsteps. I hurried out of the museum, the weight of dread pressing heavily on my chest. Back on the road, I felt a growing sense of urgency to find a place to stay for the night. I needed to escape the shadows that seemed to follow me. As the sun began to set, I spotted a small motel on the side of the highway, a dingy old place with flickering neon lights. I pulled in, desperate for some rest and safety. The motel clerk, a weary-looking man in his 60s, gave me a strange look as I checked in. "You'll want to stay inside tonight," he said, his voice low. "It gets interesting out there after dark." His cryptic warning sent a shiver down my spine, but I brushed it off, attributing it to local lore. I took my key and headed to my room, determined to lock myself away from whatever was lurking outside. That night, I settled in, watching television and trying to distract myself from my fears. However, sleep eluded me, and as the hours passed, I began to hear strange noises outside my window. The wind howled, and something, perhaps an animal, scratched at the door. My heart raced as I realized I had no idea what could be out there. As the clock ticked closer to midnight, I finally managed to drift off, exhaustion overwhelming my fears. But my sleep was short-lived. I awoke to the sound of frantic knocking on my door, echoing through the room. "Help! Please help me!" A woman's voice cried out, trembling with desperation. I bolted upright, my heart racing. "Who are you?" I shouted back, my voice shaky. "Please let me in. They're coming," she begged, her voice filled with terror. I hesitated, my instincts warning me against opening the door. "Who's coming?" I asked, trying to sound brave. "Just let me in," she cried, panic rising in her voice. "I swear, I'll explain everything. Just please, don't leave me out here." Her words struck a chord of fear deep within me. I glanced at the clock. 12:12 a.m. A sense of foreboding settled over me as I looked around the room, the shadows stretching ominously in the dim light. Something about the way she spoke sent alarm bells ringing in my mind. I took a deep breath and decided to keep the door locked. "I can't let you in. You need to leave," I shouted back, my voice trembling. The knocking grew more frantic. "Please, I'm not safe. I saw them. They're out there." A wave of nausea washed over me. "Who's out there? What are you talking about?" Silence hung in the air for a moment, and then I heard it. The soft rustling of leaves, the unmistakable sound of footsteps approaching my door. My heart dropped as I realized I wasn't alone. Suddenly, the woman's voice turned cold, losing its pleading tone. "You shouldn't have ignored the warnings," she said, her voice now filled with malice. "Now, you'll pay the price." Fear gripped me like a vice as I scrambled to the other side of the room, backing away from the door. The footsteps grew louder, circling the room. I felt a cold sweat break out across my skin as I reached for my phone, desperately dialing 911. My fingers trembled as I pressed the buttons, praying for someone to answer. 911, what's your emergency?" The operator's voice came through the line, calm yet distant. "There's someone outside my motel room. I think they're trying to get in," I stammered, barely able to get the words out. "Can you describe the person?" the operator asked. I don't know. I can't see them," I exclaimed, my panic rising. "Please, hurry." "Stay calm. Help is on the way," she reassured me, but I could hear the doubt in her voice. The footsteps stopped abruptly, and I held my breath, straining to listen. Then, a knock sounded again, but this time, it was more deliberate, more menacing. "Let me in," the voice commanded, a deep growl that sent chills down my spine. I felt a wave of dread wash over me as I realized this was no ordinary person. "Who are you?" I shouted, trying to keep my voice steady. "Just let me in," the voice replied, dripping with malice. "You have no idea what you're inviting in by staying there." Panic surged through me, and I bolted for the window, flinging it open and climbing out onto the ledge. I couldn't stay in that room a second longer. I dropped to the ground and looked around, heart pounding. The parking lot was eerily quiet, the only sound being the wind rustling through the trees. I ran toward my car, fumbling for my keys in my pocket. Just as I reached it, I glanced back at the motel room. The woman stood in the doorway, her features distorted in the dim light. She smiled at me, an unsettling grin that sent chills racing down my spine. "You can't escape," she whispered. I jumped into my car and started the engine, my hands shaking as I hit the gas and sped away from the motel. The road blurred beneath me, and I drove aimlessly, not caring where I ended up. All I knew was that I needed to get as far away from that place as possible. Hours later, exhausted and terrified, I pulled into a 24-hour diner just off the highway. I collapsed into a booth, the fluorescent lights harsh against my eyes. The waitress approached, a weary look in her eyes. "You okay, hun?" she asked, concern etched on her face. I don't know," I stammered, shaking. "I think I'm being followed." The waitress raised an eyebrow, her expression turning serious. "You're not the first to say that. This highway is known for strange happenings, people disappearing, odd sightings. You should be careful." I felt the weight of her words settle over me, a chill creeping down my spine. I recounted my story to her, my voice trembling as I described the figure, the woman, and the events of the night. She listened intently, her eyes growing wider with each word. "You should consider getting out of here," she said softly. "This highway isn't safe at night. Something dark lingers along these roads." I nodded, feeling the truth of her words resonate within me. I knew I had to leave, but where would I go? As dawn broke over the horizon, I made a decision. I would head east, away from the desert, towards the mountains where I could find safety and peace. I paid my bill and stepped outside, taking a deep breath of the cool morning air. The sun was rising, casting a warm glow over the landscape, but the shadows still felt heavy around me. I climbed into my car, my heart pounding in my chest. As I pulled onto the highway, I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the woman or the figure lurking behind me. But the road was empty, the landscape stretching out behind me in solitude. For the next few days, I drove through the mountains, finding solace in the beauty of nature. The towering trees and breathtaking vistas began to heal my frazzled nerves. I camped in established sites, always surrounded by other campers, always within earshot of safety. The memories of that night haunted me, but with each passing mile, I felt a little more at ease. Yet, the whispers of the desert still echoed in my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that something was still following me. I returned to my routine of snapping photos and exploring nature, but the unease never quite left. I often found myself glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see the dark figure lurking in the shadows. One night, as I sat by the campfire, I opened my journal to write about my journey. I found myself drawn to the section where I had written about the petrified forest. My pen hovered over the page as I contemplated the darkness I had encountered. I needed to confront it, to put the fear to rest once and for all. The next morning, I packed my gear and made the decision to return to the petrified forest. Not to camp this time, but to explore the park during the day, surrounded by the safety of other tourists. I drove back, my heart pounding with a mix of anticipation and dread. The air felt thick with memories as I approached the park entrance, a sense of foreboding wrapping around me like a shroud. As I entered the park, I noticed the familiar sights, the vibrant rock formations and the ancient trees, but the beauty felt tainted by my previous experience. I parked my car and joined a group of tourists who were guided through the park. The guide spoke passionately about the history and geology of the area, and I tried to immerse myself in the moment, hoping to push the dark memories aside. But as we ventured deeper into the park, I felt the shadows lengthen, creeping along the ground like fingers reaching out to ensnare me. My pulse quickened, and I found myself glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see the figure watching from the trees. The guide's voice faded into the background as I succumbed to my fears. At one point, I strayed from the group, drawn to a secluded area that seemed to call to me. The trees loomed above, casting long shadows across the ground. As I stepped forward, I felt a shiver run down my spine. The whispers returned, swirling around me, filling the air with a haunting melody. "Join us. Come play." I froze, the terror surging through me. I turned to leave, but the shadows thickened, closing in on me. Panic surged within me as I stumbled backward, trying to find my way back to the group. The whispers grew louder, the laughter echoing in my mind. Suddenly, I felt a presence behind me. I spun around, heart racing, and came face to face with the woman from before. She stood there, her hollow eyes fixed on me, the same unsettling grin on her face. "You can't escape, you know," she whispered, her voice dripping with malice. "No, get away from me," I screamed, turning to run. I burst through the trees, desperate to escape, the laughter trailing behind me like a ghost. Finally, I spotted the group in the distance, their backs turned to me. I sprinted toward them, tears streaming down my face. "Help me," I cried out, and the guide turned, his expression shifting from surprise to concern. "Are you okay?" he asked, rushing toward me. "Something's out there. She's out there," I gasped, pointing back into the shadows. The guide's expression hardened, and he turned to the group. "We need to get back to the main trail, now." The group followed him, and I clung to their side, my heart racing. As we retraced our steps, I felt the weight of the shadows lift, the whispers fading away. We emerged into the open, the sunlight pouring down, and I gasped in relief. Once we reached the main parking lot, I turned back to the woods, half expecting to see the woman watching from the trees. But there was nothing, only the calm stillness of the park. I felt a rush of emotions, fear, relief, and a lingering sense of dread. I hurried to my car and drove away from the park, the memories of that night flooding back. The figure, the growling, the woman, it was all too real. I knew I had to leave the desert behind for good, to escape whatever darkness had attached itself to me. As I drove east, I made a promise to myself. I would never take another road trip alone. The open road had turned into a twisted nightmare, and I needed to find solace away from the shadows. The journey would always be a part of me, but I knew I had to reclaim my freedom. With each mile, the sun dipped lower on the horizon, casting a golden light over the mountains ahead. The fear still lingered, but the beauty of the landscape reminded me that there was still hope. I drove into the fading light, leaving the darkness of the past behind, determined to forge a new path, one filled with light and the promise of new beginnings. It was the summer of 2017 when I decided to take a road trip across the United States, something I had always dreamed of doing. The idea was simple: pack my car, grab my camera, and hit the open road. I planned to explore the national parks, small towns, and everything in between. Little did I know that this adventure would turn into a nightmare that still haunts me to this day. I started my journey in California, excited and full of anticipation. The first few days were a whirlwind of breathtaking landscapes, from the rugged coastlines of Big Sur to the majestic peaks of the Sierra Nevada. I stopped at quaint diners, made small talk with locals, and captured stunning photos along the way. Everything felt perfect, but deep down, I had a nagging sense that something was off. As I crossed into Nevada, I took a detour to visit the infamous Area 51. I was fascinated by the myths surrounding the place, and I couldn't resist snapping a few photos. The barren desert landscape was eerie, but I felt a thrill coursing through me as I explored the outskirts. Little did I know, this would be the beginning of my descent into horror. That night, I found a cheap motel in a tiny town called Rachel, just outside of Area 51. It was one of those places that looked like it had seen better days, but I didn't care. I just needed a place to sleep. The owner, an elderly man with a weathered face, gave me a key and muttered something about keeping my doors locked at night. "You never know who might be lurking out there," he said with a knowing look. I shrugged it off as small-town paranoia and headed to my room. The motel was eerily quiet, save for the occasional rustle of wind outside. I tossed and turned, unable to shake the unease that settled over me. I couldn't explain it, but something felt wrong. Maybe it was the isolation of the desert, or perhaps it was the stories I had heard about the area. I finally drifted off to sleep, only to be awakened a few hours later by a strange noise outside my window. It sounded like muffled voices, no, whispers. I sat up, heart racing, and peered through the curtain. My heart sank as I spotted 3 shadowy figures huddled together near my car. They were dressed in dark clothing, their faces obscured by hoods. I watched, frozen in fear, as they moved closer to my vehicle. My instincts kicked in, and I grabbed my phone, debating whether to call the police or to confront them. But before I could make a decision, they seemed to sense my gaze and abruptly turned, walking away into the darkness. A sense of dread washed over me, and I knew I had to leave. I grabbed my things, checked out of the motel, and hit the road before dawn. I drove for hours, my mind racing. I should have been exhilarated by the adventure ahead, but instead, I felt like I was being hunted. I didn't stop until I reached the nearest city, Las Vegas. I was exhausted, both physically and mentally, and I hoped the bright lights of the city would ease my nerves. However, even in Vegas, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I wandered through the bustling strip, trying to blend in with the throngs of tourists, but everywhere I turned, I felt a prickling sensation on the back of my neck. I brushed it off, telling myself I was just paranoid from the night before. After a couple of nights in Las Vegas, I decided it was time to move on. I headed towards the Grand Canyon, eager to soak in the natural beauty. The drive was long, but the landscape changed dramatically, with red rock formations rising against the blue sky. I felt a sense of peace wash over me as I approached the park, but that peace would be short-lived. While at the Grand Canyon, I decided to take a hike on one of the less-traveled trails. I wanted to escape the crowds and experience the tranquility of nature. As I descended into the canyon, the towering walls of rock enveloped me, creating a sense of both awe and insignificance. I was in my element, lost in the beauty of the world around me. But as the day wore on, I noticed the sun dipping lower in the sky. I realized I had lost track of time. I turned back, my heart racing as the shadows grew longer. Suddenly, I heard something rustling in the bushes nearby. My breath caught in my throat as I turned to look, but nothing was there. I quickened my pace, anxiety building with each step. The path twisted and turned, and I felt more disoriented with every turn. Finally, I emerged from the trail and onto the parking lot, only to find my heart sinking again. My car was not where I had parked it. Panic set in as I searched the area, hoping it was simply a trick of the light, but deep down, I knew it was gone. I approached the visitor center, desperation clawing at my insides. "My car is missing. I parked it right over there," I exclaimed to the ranger at the front desk. "Are you sure?" he asked, his brow furrowing in concern. "Yes, I parked it right next to the big tree," I replied, feeling the weight of dread pressing down on me. The ranger nodded, a serious expression settling on his face. "Let me check the parking logs. It's possible someone towed it." As he disappeared into the back office, I glanced outside. My heart pounded in my chest as I scanned the parking lot again. My mind raced with thoughts of what could have happened. Had someone stolen it? Did I forget where I parked? Or was it something more sinister? The ranger returned with a furrowed brow. "I'm sorry, but I can't find any record of your vehicle. Can you describe it?" I did, detailing the make, model, and color. He took notes, but I could see the concern growing on his face. "You might need to file a report with the local sheriff. It's not the first time we've had a car go missing from here." As I stepped outside, panic surged through me. I had a sinking feeling that my troubles were far from over. The park was closing soon, and I would be stranded without my car. I approached the ranger again, desperation in my voice. "Can't you help me? What do I do now?" He sighed, glancing at the sky. "There's a nearby lodge where you can stay for the night. It's a bit of a drive, but I can give you directions." Grateful for any solution, I nodded. "Please, just tell me how to get there." As I drove the winding road to the lodge, the sun dipped below the horizon, plunging the landscape into darkness. My heart raced as I imagined the worst. What if someone was following me? What if my car was gone for good? I tried to push the thoughts aside, focusing on the road ahead. I finally arrived at the lodge, a rustic building nestled among the trees. It looked welcoming, but I still felt on edge. The owner, a friendly woman named Margaret, greeted me with a warm smile. "Welcome. You must be the traveler I heard about. We have a room ready for you." I managed a weak smile and followed her to my room. As I settled in, I tried to calm my racing heart. I decided to take a shower to wash away the stress of the day. Standing under the hot water, I hoped that tomorrow would bring better luck. But as I lay in bed that night, I heard a strange noise outside my window. It sounded like footsteps, slow and deliberate. I held my breath, straining to listen. My heart raced as I peered out into the darkness. The area was pitch black, and I couldn't see a thing. The footsteps stopped, and silence enveloped the night. I waited, anxiety building in my chest, until I finally convinced myself it was nothing. I closed my eyes, desperate for sleep, but it wouldn't come. A few hours later, I was jolted awake by a loud banging on my door. "Ma'am, open up. It's the sheriff," a voice called out, urgency lacing his tone. I bolted upright, heart pounding. "What's going on?" I shouted back. "Your car was found. We need you to come with us." I scrambled to get dressed, adrenaline coursing through my veins. I couldn't believe it. My car had been found. I hurriedly opened the door, and the sheriff stood there, a tall man with a stern expression. "Follow me," he instructed, and I obeyed, my heart racing as I followed him outside. The night was dark and cold as we walked toward the parking lot. The sheriff led me to a small office where my car sat parked, but it looked different. The windows were shattered, the tires slashed. My heart sank as I took in the sight. "What happened?" I gasped. "Looks like it was vandalized. Do you know anyone who might have a grudge against you?" he asked, his voice flat. "No, I don't know anyone here," I exclaimed, panic rising in my chest. "All right, we'll need you to file a report. "It's not safe for you to stay here," he said, his tone serious. I nodded, feeling tears prick at the corners of my eyes. "What do I do now?" I whispered. The sheriff sighed, glancing around the parking lot. "You can either stay at the lodge or drive back into town, but I recommend the lodge until we sort this out." I reluctantly agreed. As I sat in the office, waiting for the paperwork to be completed, I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. I was miles away from home, with a damaged car, and no way to escape the strange occurrences that seemed to follow me. Once the report was filed, I returned to the lodge, my mind racing with questions. Why had someone targeted my car? What did they want from me? I could feel the weight of the night pressing down on me as I climbed back into bed. But sleep wouldn't come. I tossed and turned, haunted by the whispers of the desert and the shadows that danced just beyond my vision. As dawn broke, I finally succumbed to exhaustion and drifted into a fitful sleep. I woke up to a strange noise coming from outside my window. My heart raced as I stumbled out of bed and peered outside. To my horror, I saw the same shadowy figures from the motel in Rachel, standing just outside the lodge. They were watching me. Panicked, I rushed to get dressed, trying to remain quiet. I could feel their eyes on me, and I knew I had to escape. I quickly packed my belongings and tiptoed toward the back door, hoping to slip away unnoticed. As I reached the door, I froze. The figures were no longer standing outside. They had vanished. My instincts screamed at me to leave, and I flung the door open and bolted for my car. I fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking as I struggled to get the door open. Finally, I jumped inside and locked the doors. I started the engine and peeled out of the parking lot, not looking back. I could feel the adrenaline coursing through me, propelling me forward as I raced down the winding road. I didn't stop until I reached a small diner on the outskirts of town. I pulled into the parking lot and stumbled inside, desperate for a sense of normalcy. The smell of coffee and fried food filled the air, but I barely registered it. I needed to gather my thoughts and figure out my next move. I sat down at a booth, heart still racing as I ordered coffee. As I sipped it, I scanned the diner, looking for any signs of the shadowy figures. To my relief, the place was filled with ordinary people, laughing and chatting. But the unease lingered, gnawing at my insides. After finishing my coffee, I decided it was time to get back on the road. I still had a long way to go, and I needed to find a way to shake off the fear that clung to me. I got back in my car and pulled out onto the highway, trying to put the last few days behind me. But the further I drove, the more anxious I became. I kept glancing in my rearview mirror, half expecting to see the shadowy figures following me. The landscape changed from desert to mountains, but the feeling of being watched never left me. I decided to stop at a gas station to refuel and gather my thoughts. As I filled my tank, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. I turned to look around, but the area was empty. My paranoia was getting the best of me. As I stepped inside the convenience store to pay, the bell above the door chimed, and I felt a chill run down my spine. A man stood at the counter, his back turned to me. Something about him felt wrong, and I quickly grabbed my receipt and headed back outside. Just as I reached my car, I heard the door of the convenience store swing open behind me. I turned to see the man stepping out, his eyes locked onto mine. He was tall and lean, with an unsettling smile that sent shivers down my spine. "Nice car you got there," he said, his voice dripping with malice. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my composure. "Thanks," I replied, my voice shaky. I could feel the weight of his gaze, and I knew I had to leave. I hurried into my car, locking the doors as I started the engine. I glanced in my rearview mirror, only to see the man watching me. a twisted grin spreading across his face. Panic surged through me as I pulled away, my heart racing. I drove for hours, my mind racing with thoughts of what had just happened. I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that clung to me. I needed to get somewhere safe. I decided to head toward the nearest city, hoping to find some comfort in the familiar. As I drove, the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the road. I turned on the radio to distract myself, but the music did little to ease my anxiety. My thoughts kept drifting back to the man at the gas station and the shadowy figures. It felt like I was in a horror movie, and I was the unsuspecting victim. Just as night fell, I finally arrived in the city. The bright lights felt like a refuge, and I quickly found a hotel to stay the night. As I checked in, the receptionist greeted me with a warm smile, but I could sense something was off. Her eyes darted toward the door as if she expected someone to come in. "Are you traveling alone?" she asked, her voice tinged with concern. I nodded, trying to act nonchalant. "Just passing through." Her expression darkened slightly. "Be careful out there. There have been some strange reports in the area." My heart sank. "What do you mean?" "Just be aware of your surroundings. It's a crazy world out there," she said, her tone serious. I thanked her and took my key, feeling a chill run down my spine. I made my way to my room, locking the door behind me. I turned on the TV, hoping to distract myself from the fear that threatened to consume me. But sleep wouldn't come. I lay awake, listening to the sounds of the hotel, the hum of the air conditioner, the distant sounds of traffic, and the occasional creak of the building settling. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me, lurking just beyond my door. Around midnight, I finally drifted off into a restless sleep. But I was jolted awake by a loud banging on my door. "Open up, we know you're in there," a voice shouted, sending adrenaline coursing through my veins. I froze, heart racing as I glanced at the clock, 12:30 a.m. I had no idea who it was, but fear gripped me. I grabbed my phone and crouched down, trying to stay silent. The banging grew more frantic. "We know you're in there. Open up." I held my breath, trying to remain calm. The voice was deep, and I could hear others outside, murmuring amongst themselves. Panic set in as I realized they weren't going away. Suddenly, I heard footsteps retreating down the hallway, but the fear remained. I waited, unsure of what to do. Minutes passed, feeling like an eternity. My heart pounded in my chest as I considered my options. Should I call the police? Should I sneak out the back? Just then, I heard a loud crash outside my door. My heart dropped as I realized they were trying to break in. I quickly dialed 911, my hands trembling as I whispered, "Help! Someone is trying to get into my hotel room." "Stay calm. We're dispatching a unit now," the operator said, her voice steady. "Do you know how many people are outside?" I glanced through the peephole, but it was too dark to see anything. "I don't know. At least 3, maybe more." "Stay on the line and keep your door locked," she instructed. I hung up, trying to steady my breath. The pounding on the door continued, and I knew I had to think fast. I grabbed my suitcase and quietly moved to the bathroom, hoping for a way out. The window was too small, and there was no balcony. My heart raced as I heard the door splintering under the weight of their efforts. Just as I was about to lose hope, I heard sirens in the distance. Relief washed over me, but the pounding continued. "We're not going to hurt you," a voice called out. "Just open the door." "No!" I shouted back, feeling tears stream down my face. "Get away from me!" The sirens grew louder, and the banging intensified. Just as I was about to lose all hope, I heard a loud crash followed by shouting. "Police, step away from the door." The pounding stopped, and I held my breath, listening intently. I heard footsteps retreating and muffled voices. Finally, there was a knock at my door. "Ma'am, this is the police. Open up." I scrambled to the door and unlocked it, flinging it open to find two officers standing there, their expressions serious. "Are you okay?" one of them asked, glancing around the room. "I think so," I stammered, relief flooding through me. "We received reports of a disturbance in the area. Can you tell us what happened?" the other officer asked, taking notes. I quickly explained everything: the strange figures, the man at the gas station, and the attack at the hotel. Their expressions hardened as they listened. "We'll need to file a report and take your statement," one of the officers said. "But for now, you're safe." As they gathered information, I felt the weight of my fear begin to lift. I was finally safe, but the trauma lingered. I could hardly believe the events that had transpired over the past few days. After filing my report, the officers offered to escort me to a new hotel for the night. "We'll keep an eye on you," one of them assured me. I nodded gratefully, feeling a sense of safety in their presence. The next morning, I left the city behind, determined to finish my road trip. I drove through the mountains, finally finding solace in the beauty of the landscape. The sun shone brightly, and for the first time in days, I felt a sense of calm. But the shadow of what had happened still loomed over me. I knew I would never forget that trip, the terrifying experiences that unfolded, and the way fear had gripped my heart. I returned home, grateful for my safety, but forever changed by the darkness that lurked just beneath the surface of my adventure. Now, as I look back on that summer road trip, I realize that the journey was not just about the places I visited, but about confronting my fears and discovering my own strength. It's a reminder that the open road can lead to unexpected encounters, both beautiful and terrifying, and that sometimes the scariest monsters are the ones we cannot see. It was the summer of 2018 when I decided to take a spontaneous road trip across the Midwest. I had just graduated college and wanted to celebrate my newfound freedom by hitting the open road. I packed my car with essentials: snacks, water, a couple of changes of clothes, and a good playlist. The destination didn't matter. I just wanted to drive, explore, and find adventure. After several days on the road, I found myself in the small town of Blue Ridge, a place I'd never heard of before. It was late afternoon, and the sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows on the quiet streets. The kind of place where everyone knows each other, I thought, as I pulled into a gas station to refuel. As I stepped out of the car, I noticed a man standing by the entrance, wearing a faded flannel shirt and jeans. He looked to be in his mid-40s, with scruffy hair and a worn face. I could tell he had been out in the sun for too long. He smiled at me, and I forced a smile back, trying not to think about the news stories I'd heard about hitchhikers and the dangers of picking them up. I filled my tank and decided to grab a snack inside the convenience store. As I walked past the man, he called out to me. "Hey there, you headed somewhere special?" "Just exploring," I replied, keeping my distance. "Mind if I ask for a ride?" he said, his smile fading slightly. "I'm trying to get to the next town over. It's about 20 miles, and I'd really appreciate it." I hesitated. I had never picked up a hitchhiker before, and a voice in my head warned me against it. But there was something in his eyes, a hint of desperation, that made me feel a pang of sympathy. The town was small, and I couldn't imagine he was dangerous, but the thought still lingered. "I don't know," I said, glancing around. "I'm not really comfortable with that." "Sure, I get it," he replied, looking down at the ground. "I just thought I'd ask. No harm done." I walked into the store, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling. As I browsed the snacks, I couldn't help but glance out the window. The man was still standing there, looking around, clearly waiting for someone to stop for him. I felt guilty for turning him down, and before I knew it, I had made my decision. I bought my snacks and walked back outside. "Okay, if you still need a ride, I can take you." His face lit up with gratitude. "Really? Thank you so much. I really appreciate it." As he climbed into the passenger seat, I noticed a distinct smell. Sweat and something else I couldn't quite place. He introduced himself as Jake and thanked me again for the ride. I nodded, forcing a smile, and started the car. The conversation started off light, with him telling me about the area and his past experiences traveling. He seemed harmless, if not a little rough around the edges. But as we drove, the conversation took a darker turn. Jake began to share unsettling stories about his life. "You know," he said, looking out the window, "there are a lot of crazy people out there. I've had some wild experiences hitchhiking. You wouldn't believe the things I've seen." "Like what?" I asked, trying to sound casual but feeling increasingly uncomfortable. "Just weird stuff. People can be real twisted." He paused, glancing at me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "You ever heard about the couple that went missing in these parts? A lot of folks think it was just an accident, but you never know, do you?" I forced a laugh, but my heart was racing. "Yeah, I guess you never really know." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "There's a lot of darkness in these small towns. You think you know someone, and then they turn out to be something else entirely." As we continued down the road, I tried to change the subject, but Jake seemed determined to keep the conversation on the edge of horror. He recounted tales of hitchhikers who had vanished and of strange people he had encountered in his travels. My gut instinct told me I should drop him off and keep going, but I felt trapped in the small space of my car, too polite to ask him to get out. Eventually, we reached a fork in the road where I had to decide whether to take the scenic route or the highway. I opted for the highway, thinking it would be faster, but Jake frowned. "I wouldn't go that way if I were you. There's a shortcut through the woods that's much quicker." "Are you sure? I've never been this way before," I replied, skepticism creeping into my voice. "Trust me," he said, his voice eerily calm. "It's just a little detour. You'll thank me later." Against my better judgment, I took the turn he suggested. As we drove deeper into the woods, the atmosphere changed. The trees seemed to close in around us, and the sunlight barely penetrated the dense canopy. I felt a chill run down my spine as Jake continued to share bizarre anecdotes about the area, his voice taking on a sinister edge. Then, without warning, my car sputtered and came to a stop. I tried to restart the engine, but it wouldn't budge. Panic surged through me. "What's wrong?" Jake asked, feigning concern, but there was a glimmer of something else in his eyes. "I don't know. It was running fine before," I said, my voice shaking. I glanced around, feeling the oppressive silence of the woods closing in on me. Jake leaned back in his seat, a smile creeping onto his face. "Well, looks like we're stuck here." I felt a surge of fear as I realized how isolated we were. "Do you know anything about cars?" I asked desperately. "Not really," he replied casually, "but I'm sure someone will come by eventually." My heart raced as I looked out the window. The road was empty, and the trees towered over us, their shadows stretching menacingly. "Maybe we should start walking," I suggested, trying to remain calm. "Walk where?" he replied, chuckling softly. "You'll just get lost out there. Besides, it's safer in here with me." His words sent chills down my spine. "What do you mean by that?" I demanded, my voice rising. You don't want to be out there alone. Trust me, he said, his tone shifting from friendly to threatening. I took a deep breath, realizing I needed to take control of the situation. I'm going to call for help, I said, pulling out my phone. Good luck with that, he said, smirking. No signal out here. I fumbled with my phone, trying to stay composed. He was right. There was no signal. The realization hit me hard. I was completely alone with a stranger in the middle of nowhere. My mind raced as I searched for a way out. Suddenly, Jake leaned forward, his expression shifting to something darker. You know, you're lucky I picked you up. I could have left you out here, stranded. Let me out, I said, my voice trembling. He laughed, a cold, menacing sound that echoed in the confined space. Not a chance. Desperation set in as I looked for something to defend myself with. My eyes darted around the car until they landed on a tire iron in the back seat. If you don't let me go, I swear I'll use this, I threatened, my voice shaking. His laughter faded, replaced by an unsettling silence. You think you can scare me with that? You don't know who you're dealing with. At that moment, I realized I had to act quickly. I grabbed the tire iron and swung it at him, catching him off guard. He flinched, and I seized the opportunity to scramble out of the car. I didn't look back as I ran down the road, my heart pounding in my chest. I heard Jake shout behind me, but I pushed myself to run faster. I had no idea where I was going, but I needed to get away from him. The woods felt alive around me, branches scratching at my arms as I pushed through the underbrush, my breath coming in ragged gasps. After what felt like an eternity, I stumbled onto a dirt road, and in the distance, I saw the glow of headlights. I waved my arms frantically, desperate for help. A car slowed down, and I sprinted toward it, my heart racing with hope. The driver, a woman in her 30s, looked startled as I approached. "What's going on?" she asked, her eyes wide with concern. "Please, I need your help. There's a man. He's trying to hurt me," I gasped, tears streaming down my face. Without hesitation, she unlocked the door and motioned for me to get in. I jumped into the passenger seat, feeling a wave of relief wash over me. As she drove away, I looked back at the road, half expecting to see Jake emerging from the woods. "Who was that guy?" the woman asked, glancing at me with concern. "I don't know. He was a hitchhiker, and I picked him up. He was fine at first, but then he turned scary," I said, still trembling. The woman nodded, her expression serious. "You did the right thing getting away from him. Those situations can turn dangerous fast." As we drove toward the nearest town, I felt the adrenaline fade, replaced by sheer exhaustion. I had escaped, but the fear still lingered in my mind. I never saw Jake again, but the encounter stayed with me long after that day. When I finally reached a safe place, I reported the incident to the local authorities. They assured me they would look for Jake, but cautioned me about the dangers of picking up hitchhikers. Looking back, I realized how close I had come to a terrible fate. That summer road trip, meant to be an adventure, turned into a chilling reminder of the risks we take when we venture into the unknown. It taught me to trust my instincts and to be cautious about the kindness I offered to strangers. Sometimes, the open road leads to unexpected dangers, and I would never forget the lesson I learned that day. It was late September, and I was excited to embark on a solo road trip from my home in Chicago to the breathtaking landscapes of the Rocky Mountains. I had planned this trip for months, eager to escape the urban grind and immerse myself in nature. My car was packed with camping gear, snacks, and a carefully curated playlist. I hit the road early in the morning, the sun just beginning to rise, casting a golden hue over the horizon. The drive was uneventful at first. I cruised along the highway, passing through small towns and fields that stretched as far as the eye could see. I made good time, stopping only for gas and snacks. As the hours went by, the landscape gradually transformed from flat farmland to rolling hills, and I felt a growing sense of anticipation. Around mid-afternoon, I found myself on a stretch of highway in Nebraska that felt increasingly desolate. I had planned to stop for gas in the next town, but as the miles ticked by, I realized I hadn't seen a sign for a gas station in a while. A nagging worry crept into my mind as my fuel gauge dipped closer to empty. I remembered the warning from my friend who had driven through this area. Always fill up when you can. It's easy to get stuck out there. Eventually, I spotted a small sign for a gas station about 5 miles ahead. My heart lifted at the prospect of refueling, and I hoped the place was open. As I drove, I noticed the sun beginning to set, casting long shadows on the road. I didn't want to be stranded out in the middle of nowhere after dark. When I finally arrived at the gas station, I was relieved to see the neon lights flickering in the twilight. The place looked old and run down, with peeling paint and a few broken windows, but it was a beacon of hope in the otherwise empty landscape. I parked my car and stepped out, the cool evening air hitting my face. As I approached the building, I noticed that it was eerily quiet. There were no other cars around, and the only sound was the faint hum of the gas pump. I hesitated for a moment, a feeling of unease washing over me, but I brushed it off. I needed gas, and I had no other options. Inside, the gas station was dimly lit, with outdated decor and shelves stocked with dusty snacks. A middle-aged man stood behind the counter, his face weathered and tired. He looked up as I entered, a faint smile crossing his lips. "Evening," he said, his voice gravelly. "Hi," I replied, trying to mask my discomfort. "Just here for gas." "Sure thing. Pumps are outside. Just let me know if you need anything," he said, nodding toward the door. I went back outside and filled my tank, keeping an eye on the shadows as they grew longer. The whole place felt off, like a scene from a horror movie. I glanced back at the gas station, noting the old neon sign that flickered, almost in rhythm with my unease. Once I finished pumping gas, I returned to pay the man. He was still at the counter, but he had shifted his gaze to the window, looking out into the distance. "You traveling alone?" he asked, his tone casual, but laced with something darker. "Yeah, just passing through to the Rockies," I replied, trying to sound nonchalant. "Be careful out there," he said, turning to face me, his eyes narrowing. "It gets real lonely once the sun sets. You never know who might be lurking around." My stomach dropped. "Right," I said, attempting to laugh it off. "Thanks for the heads up." As I handed him the cash, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was studying me, analyzing my every move. "You need a place to stay for the night. There's a motel down the road, just a mile or so. Might be worth checking out," he said, his voice low. "I'm okay. Just going to drive a little longer," I said, eager to leave. The idea of staying in this remote area felt like a bad decision. He nodded, but didn't look convinced. "Suit yourself. Just remember, it's a long stretch until the next town. You might want to reconsider." I walked back to my car, feeling his gaze on my back. The fading light made the shadows stretch across the pavement, and for the first time that day, I felt a chill run through me. I started the engine and took one last look at the gas station. The man was still watching, his face partially obscured by the dim light. As I pulled away, I glanced in my rearview mirror. The gas station grew smaller, but the feeling of dread lingered. I drove for about 20 minutes. but the darkness quickly enveloped the road, the only light coming from my headlights. I kept my speed steady, eager to get to the next town. After a while, I spotted a sign indicating the town was just ahead. Relief washed over me, but as I continued driving, I realized the town was taking longer to appear than I had expected. Anxiety crept back in as I noticed the road growing more isolated, lined with trees that seemed to close in around me. Then I heard it, a faint thud, like something hitting the underside of my car. I pulled over to the side of the road and got out, my heart racing. I crouched down to check for damage, hoping it was nothing serious. That's when I saw it, a dark figure in the distance, standing by the tree line. My stomach dropped as I realized it was a person, and my instincts kicked in. I quickly got back in the car and locked the doors, my breath quickening. The figure remained still, watching me. I had no idea who they were or what they wanted, but the feeling of being trapped washed over me. I decided to wait a moment to see if they would move. The last thing I wanted was to attract attention, but I couldn't just sit there either. Just as I was about to start the engine, I noticed the figure was walking toward me. Panic surged through me, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. I fumbled with my keys, ready to drive away. As the figure drew closer, I realized it was a woman, disheveled and wild-eyed. She looked frantic, glancing back toward the trees. "Help me," she shouted, her voice raw with fear. I hesitated for a moment, torn between compassion and fear. "What's wrong?" I called out, keeping the door locked. "There's someone after me," she cried, glancing over her shoulder. "Please, let me in." My instincts screamed at me to drive away, but the desperation in her voice tugged at my heart. I felt paralyzed, unsure of what to do. "Are you hurt?" I asked cautiously. "No, just please, I need to get away from him," she yelled, her eyes wide with terror. Against my better judgment, I hit the locks and opened the passenger door. "Get in," I urged, glancing around nervously. She jumped inside, slamming the door behind her. "Drive, just drive," she shouted. I started the engine and floored it down the road, adrenaline pumping through my veins. I glanced at her, trying to gauge the situation. "Who's after you?" I asked, my voice steady despite my rising panic. "I don't know," she gasped, her eyes darting around. "I was hiking in the woods, and I saw him. He was watching me. I think he's still out there." I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of her fear. I turned down a side road, hoping to find some shelter. "We need to find help. Is there a place nearby?" "There's a ranger station a few miles ahead," she replied, her voice trembling. "They can help us." As I drove, I could see her panic rising. "I can't believe this is happening," she muttered, running her hands through her hair. "I thought I was safe out there." We reached the ranger station, and I parked quickly. The woman wasted no time, jumping out of the car and rushing to the door. I followed closely behind, the fear of the unknown gripping me. We knocked furiously, and a few moments later, a ranger opened the door, confusion etched on his face. "What's going on?" he asked, taking in our frantic expressions. "There's someone after her," I exclaimed, breathless. "We need help." The ranger's demeanor shifted immediately. Come in," he said, ushering us inside. The warmth of the building enveloped us, and I felt a moment of relief wash over me. Once inside, we explained the situation, and the ranger quickly radioed for backup. As we waited, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. The woman stood close to me, shaking slightly. "Thank you for stopping for me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought I was going to die out there." After what felt like an eternity, more rangers arrived, and we were taken to a secure area. They assured us that they would investigate the situation and that we were safe. But as I sat there, the reality of what had just happened sunk in. Hours later, after the rangers returned, they informed us that they had found a campsite nearby, but there was no sign of anyone being there. "It's possible you just saw someone hiking, but we'll keep an eye out," the ranger said. I couldn't shake the feeling that we had narrowly escaped something terrible that night. They offered to call a tow truck for my car, but I decided it was best to stay at the ranger station until morning. As the night wore on, I reflected on how close I had come to a life-altering experience. The woman and I shared a quiet bond, both aware that we had faced the unknown together. I realized that not all road trips end in scenic views and peaceful moments. Some lead to encounters that leave lasting scars. When morning came, I was exhausted, but grateful to be safe. As we exchanged numbers, I promised to check in with her later. I left the ranger station, the sun rising in the distance, casting light on the dark memories of the night before. That trip taught me to respect the dangers that lurked beyond the comforts of home, and to always trust my instincts on the road. It was a crisp autumn day in 2019 when I decided to take a road trip from my hometown in Ohio to visit some friends in upstate New York. I had a new car, the sun was shining, and I was looking forward to a much-needed escape from my daily routine. The drive was supposed to be straightforward, a few hours on the interstate, followed by a few hours on smaller roads to reach my destination. As I navigated the highway, I felt a sense of freedom that only comes from hitting the open road. The trees were painted in vibrant shades of orange and red, and I couldn't help but feel exhilarated. About halfway through my trip, I decided to take a scenic detour. I had heard about a beautiful stretch of road called the Old State Road that promised stunning views of the fall foliage. I exited the interstate and found myself on a 2-lane road lined with towering trees. The air was crisp, and I rolled down the windows, letting the cool breeze fill my car. After driving for about 20 minutes, I began to notice that the landscape started to change. The trees closed in on either side, and the road became narrower. I didn't think much of it at the time. I was lost in the beauty of my surroundings. After a while, I saw a sign that read, "Old State Road, next 20 miles." I was excited to see what awaited me. But as I drove further, the scenery became eerily quiet. The road was deserted, and I began to feel a sense of unease wash over me. I was alone, with no other cars in sight, and the woods felt like they were closing in. Suddenly, my phone buzzed. I looked down to check it, and when I glanced back up, I was startled to see a figure standing by the side of the road. It was a man, disheveled and ragged, waving frantically. Instinct kicked in, and I slowed down, debating whether to stop or keep driving. I had always been taught not to pick up hitchhikers, but something about his expression caught my attention. I pulled over a safe distance away, rolling down my window cautiously. "Are you okay?" I called out. "Please, I need help," he shouted, his voice trembling. "My car broke down a few miles back, and I've been walking for hours. I just need a ride to the nearest gas station." His eyes were wide with desperation, and I felt a pang of sympathy. I glanced at my phone. I had no signal out here, and the last thing I wanted was to leave him stranded. Against my better judgment, I opened the door. "Hop in," I said, hoping this wouldn't be a mistake. As he climbed into my car, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He was dressed in dirty clothes, and his hair was unkempt. "Thank you so much," he said, his voice shaky. "I thought I was going to be out here all night." I forced a smile and tried to engage him in conversation as I drove. "What happened? Where did your car break down?" I asked. keeping my tone light. He looked out the window, fidgeting with his hands. "It's just up the road a bit. I was passing through on my way to a job interview. I thought this road would be quicker, but then it just stopped working." His voice trailed off, and I sensed a heaviness in the air. The further we drove, the more uncomfortable I felt. He kept glancing at me, and his gaze lingered a little too long. I tried to ignore it, focusing on the winding road ahead. After a few minutes, I saw a small gas station in the distance, relief washing over me. "There it is," I said, trying to sound cheerful. "You can get help there." As we pulled into the gas station, I noticed it looked even more run down than the one I had stopped at earlier. The fluorescent lights flickered, and the windows were dusty. It felt abandoned, like something out of a horror movie. A single gas pump stood outside, and a large sign advertised the station's 24-hour service, but it was clear no one had been there in a while. I'll go inside and see if anyone's around," I said, a little hesitant. The man nodded, but his eyes seemed to darken. I stepped inside the station, and a chill ran down my spine. The place was dimly lit, with shelves of outdated snacks and a small counter with a bell that looked like it hadn't been rung in years. I called out, "Hello? Is anyone here?" My voice echoed back, but no one answered. Just then, I heard a noise from the back of the store, a thud, followed by muffled voices. My heart raced. I didn't want to leave the man waiting outside, but my gut was telling me something wasn't right. I hesitated, glancing back toward the door, when suddenly the bell rang behind me. I turned to see the man from my car standing there, a strange smile on his face. "I was just checking on you," he said, his tone casual, but with an underlying tension. No one's here," I said, backing up slightly. "I think we should just go." His smile faded, and for a moment, I thought I saw something cold in his eyes. "Come on, we can't leave now. I really need your help." Panic surged through me as I stepped backward, feeling trapped. I glanced toward the door, and before I could react, he lunged at me. I dodged to the side and ran toward the exit, my heart pounding. The door swung open, and I bolted outside, adrenaline coursing through my veins. I jumped into my car, fumbling with the keys as I tried to start the engine. I glanced in the rearview mirror to see the man standing outside, watching me with an expression of fury. "You can't leave me," he screamed, his voice echoing in the quiet night. Finally, the engine roared to life, and I hit the gas, tires screeching as I peeled out of the gas station. I didn't look back, focusing only on the road ahead. My heart raced as I drove faster, desperate to put as much distance between myself and that gas station as possible. The road twisted and turned, and I drove for what felt like an eternity, the darkness pressing in around me. My thoughts raced as I tried to process what had just happened. How had I let myself get into that situation? Why hadn't I trusted my instincts? After a while, I found a brightly lit diner and pulled into the parking lot, my hands shaking as I stepped out of the car. I rushed inside, seeking the safety of other people. The familiar smell of coffee and fried food enveloped me, and I let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding. The waitress greeted me with a warm smile, but I could barely manage a reply. I ordered a coffee and sat at the counter, still on edge. My heart slowly began to calm, but the memory of that man lingered in my mind. As I sipped my coffee, I overheard a couple at the next booth talking about a string of disappearances along the old state road. They mentioned how a few travelers had gone missing in the area over the past few months, and my stomach dropped. It felt like a dark cloud hovering over my head. I finished my coffee, my mind racing. I had narrowly escaped something terrible, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the man I had picked up was involved in those disappearances. I paid my bill and left the diner, vowing never to take that road again. The drive home felt surreal. I replayed the events in my mind, grateful for my instincts that had saved me. That night, I learned the importance of being cautious and trusting my gut when it comes to strangers, especially when traveling alone. I never did visit my friends in New York, and that road trip became a haunting memory. The old state road remained etched in my mind, a chilling reminder of how quickly a seemingly simple journey could take a dark turn. It was the summer of 2018, and I was excited to take a much-needed road trip from my home in New York to visit my sister in North Carolina. After months of stressful work and little downtime, I finally had the chance to unwind and explore the open road. I packed my bags, loaded my car with snacks and a playlist of my favorite songs, and set off early in the morning, ready for adventure. The first part of the drive was familiar, filled with the scenic views of the Appalachian Mountains and the rolling hills of Virginia. I felt free with the windows down and the wind in my hair. However, as I drove deeper into the rural areas, the landscape began to change. The highways turned into winding roads, flanked by dense forests, and cell service became spotty at best. About 5 hours into my trip, I decided to take a break at a small roadside diner. The place was quaint, with faded signs and an old jukebox playing classic tunes. I parked my car and walked inside, grateful for the chance to stretch my legs. The waitress, a kind older woman with a warm smile, served me a cup of coffee and a slice of pie. I chatted with her for a while, and she told me stories about the area, including a few local legends that made my skin crawl. "There's a lot of strange things that happen in these woods," she said, leaning in with a conspiratorial grin. "People have gone missing, and there are tales of things that go bump in the night." I chuckled nervously, thinking it was all just folklore, but I couldn't help feeling a slight chill. After finishing my meal, I continued on my journey. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the road. I knew I had a few more hours to drive, and I wanted to make it to my sister's place before midnight. The GPS said there was a shortcut I could take, but it warned that the road was less traveled. Feeling adventurous, I took the detour. The road narrowed, and the trees closed in around me, creating a tunnel of darkness. My phone had lost signal, and the only sound was the hum of my engine and the crunch of gravel under my tires. I felt a twinge of anxiety, but brushed it off, determined to enjoy the ride. As I drove deeper into the woods, I began to notice something unsettling. Every few miles, there were small hand-painted signs nailed to the trees that read things like, "Beware" and "Turn back." I slowed down, curiosity peaked, but unease growing. I tried to convince myself it was just local teenagers having fun, but a voice in my head urged me to turn back. Ignoring the warning signs, I pressed on, the road becoming increasingly bumpy and overgrown. I was about to give up and turn around when my car sputtered and came to a halt. Panic washed over me. I tried to restart the engine, but it wouldn't budge. I was alone in the middle of nowhere, with darkness closing in around me. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. I reached for my phone, hoping to call for help, but it was useless without a signal. The weight of the silence enveloped me, and I felt utterly isolated. After a few minutes of futile attempts to restart the car, I decided to get out and see if I could flag down any passing vehicles. As I stepped out of the car, the chill in the air intensified. The darkness was overwhelming, and the only light came from the dim glow of my headlights. I walked to the edge of the road, hoping for a miracle, but only the rustle of leaves and the distant sounds of the forest filled the night. Suddenly, I heard something. a faint rustling sound coming from the trees behind me. I turned, squinting into the darkness, but there was nothing there. I shook my head, telling myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. I was about to head back to the car when I saw a figure emerge from the trees. My heart dropped. It was a man, tall and gaunt, wearing a ragged flannel shirt. He looked disheveled, with wild hair and dirt on his face. I froze, my instincts screaming at me to run. The man slowly approached, and I could see that his eyes were wide and unsteady. "You lost?" he asked, his voice gravelly and low. My car broke down," I stammered, trying to keep my voice steady. "I was hoping to find help." He smiled, but it was unsettling, like he knew something I didn't. "You shouldn't be out here at night. It's not safe." I felt a shiver run down my spine. "I can help you," he said, stepping closer. I took a step back, instinctively reaching for my phone, wishing for a signal, but it was still dead. "No, I'm fine. I'll just wait for a car to come by," I replied, my voice trembling. He frowned, his expression darkening. "There are no cars out here, just me and you." I could see the malice in his eyes, and I knew I had to get away from him. Before I could turn, he lunged forward, grabbing my arm with surprising strength. Panic surged through me, and I yanked my arm away. "Let go of me!" I screamed, stumbling backward toward my car. He seemed unfazed, just watching me with that same chilling smile. Desperate, I fumbled for my car keys, but they slipped from my fingers and fell into the gravel. I turned and ran back to the car, adrenaline coursing through my veins. I could hear him following me, his footsteps crunching on the ground behind me. I managed to grab my keys, fumbling to get the door open. Just as I was about to jump inside, I felt his hand grip my shoulder, spinning me around. I elbowed him hard in the gut, and he stumbled back. I didn't look back. I dove into the car, slamming the door shut and locking it. My heart raced as I frantically inserted the key into the ignition, praying it would start. The engine roared to life, and I slammed the gear into drive, spinning the wheels as I took off down the road. I didn't dare look in the rearview mirror. I drove as fast as I could, the headlights illuminating the twisted trees around me. I didn't stop until I reached the diner where I had eaten earlier. Breathless and shaking, I parked in front of the diner and rushed inside, my heart pounding. The waitress looked up from behind the counter, her face filled with concern. "Are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost," she said. I took a moment to collect myself, still trembling. "I think someone was following me on that old road," I gasped. I broke down, and when I got out to look for help, a man appeared. I thought he was going to hurt me. She nodded, her expression grave. "That road isn't safe at night. You're lucky you got away." She called the police, and I sat in a booth, feeling the weight of what had just happened wash over me. The police arrived shortly after, and I told them everything. They took my statement and assured me they would patrol the area. As I drove away from the diner, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. I was grateful to be safe, but the memory of that man haunted me. The rest of my trip went smoothly, but I couldn't forget the incident. I told my sister about it when I arrived, and she looked worried. "You really shouldn't take those back roads alone," she said. I agreed wholeheartedly. To this day, I avoid those less traveled paths, especially at night. That road trip taught me a valuable lesson about trusting my instincts and being cautious in unfamiliar places. I still think about that man in the woods and what could have happened if I hadn't escaped. The road to nowhere became a haunting reminder of the dangers that can lurk just out of sight. waiting for an opportunity. In the summer of 2017, I decided to take a road trip from my home in Philadelphia to a friend's wedding in a small town in Virginia. It was supposed to be a weekend of fun, laughter, and celebration. But what I experienced during that trip would haunt me for years to come. The day of my departure was bright and sunny, the perfect day for a long drive. I packed my bags, loaded my car with snacks, and set off in the early morning, excited to hit the open road. The drive started off smoothly as I cruised down the interstate, listening to my favorite playlist and enjoying the scenic views. As I approached Virginia, I decided to take a detour to avoid the heavy traffic on the interstate. I remembered hearing about a scenic byway that promised beautiful landscapes and charming small towns. With the GPS guiding me, I felt adventurous and confident, eager to explore. The road I chose twisted and turned through the countryside, lined with lush trees and picturesque fields. As the sun began to set, the golden light painted the landscape in warm hues. I stopped at a quaint little diner for dinner, where the locals were friendly and the food was delicious. I was in high spirits, grateful for the unexpected adventure. After dinner, I resumed my journey, but the mood quickly changed. As the light faded, the landscape transformed into a thick forest, and the road became narrow and winding. I had lost my cell signal, which didn't bother me too much at first, but as darkness enveloped the surroundings, I felt a growing sense of unease. The only sounds were the rustling of leaves and the occasional hoot of an owl. About 30 minutes into the drive, I saw a flicker of light up ahead. As I got closer, I realized it was an old, dilapidated gas station. The neon sign buzzed and flickered, but it was the only sign of life for miles. Feeling low on fuel, I pulled in, hoping to fill up and get back on the road. As I stepped out of the car, a cold wind swept through the lot, and I shivered. The station looked abandoned, with broken windows and peeling paint. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if I should just leave, but the thought of running out of gas was too frightening. I pushed the door open, and a bell jingled overhead. Inside, the dim light revealed shelves covered in dust and cobwebs. The air smelled musty, and I called out, "Hello? Is anyone here?" My voice echoed in the silence. Just then, an older man emerged from the shadows behind the counter. He had a scruffy beard and wore a faded flannel shirt. His eyes looked tired, and there was something unsettling about his smile. "Evening, traveler," he said in a gravelly voice. "What brings you out here?" "Just passing through," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need to fill up my tank." He nodded and gestured toward the pumps outside. "Sure thing. Just let me know if you need anything else." I filled my tank while he watched from the doorway, his expression unreadable. As I finished, I felt a sudden urge to leave. There was something about the whole place that felt off. I hurried back inside to pay, but the man was no longer at the counter. I called out again, but there was no response. That's when I heard it. A soft scratching noise coming from the back of the station. It was faint, but it sent chills down my spine. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just my imagination. I quickly paid for the gas, eager to get back on the road. As I stepped outside, I noticed the darkness had deepened, and the forest seemed to loom closer, pressing in around me. I felt an inexplicable sense of dread wash over me. I got into my car, locked the doors, and turned on the headlights. Just as I was about to pull away, I saw a figure moving in the shadows near the edge of the woods. My heart raced as I squinted to see more clearly. It was a woman, her clothes tattered and dirty, her hair matted and wild. She appeared to be staggering, and something in her eyes was haunting. My instinct was to drive away, but a part of me felt compelled to help. I rolled down my window slightly and called out, "Are you okay? Do you need help?" She stopped and turned toward me, her eyes wide and filled with fear. "You shouldn't be here," she shouted, her voice trembling. "You need to leave. They're coming." Panic surged through me. I didn't know who they were, but her urgency was palpable. Just then, the old man emerged from the shadows of the station, a look of annoyance on his face. Now, don't mind her," he said, waving a hand dismissively. "She's just a little lost." The woman backed away, glancing at the woods as if expecting something to emerge. I felt frozen, caught between two unsettling figures. The old man's demeanor shifted. There was something predatory in his smile now. "You should just go," he said, his tone suddenly menacing. "It's not safe to linger here." Fear clawed at my throat, and I knew I had to make a choice. I slammed my foot on the gas pedal and sped away from the gas station, heart pounding in my chest. The woman's terrified expression burned in my mind as I tore down the winding road, the trees blurring past me. I didn't stop until I reached a small town about 20 minutes later, where the streetlights illuminated the night. I parked at a diner that was still open and rushed inside, desperate to feel safe among other people. The waitress greeted me with a smile, but I could barely respond. I recounted the events to her, and she listened intently, her expression growing more serious. "You're lucky you got away," she said, shaking her head. "That place has a reputation. People have gone missing around there, especially travelers. They say the old man is involved in something dark." My stomach dropped as I processed her words. I had been so close to danger without even realizing it. I sat in the diner for a while, trying to calm my nerves and gather my thoughts. Eventually, I decided it was best to stay overnight in town and leave for Virginia in the morning. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. The woman's warning echoed in my mind, and I couldn't help but wonder what would have happened if I hadn't left when I did. The next day, I made the drive to my sister's place, but I was haunted by the experience. I avoided taking any back roads, sticking to the well-lit highways and populated areas. To this day, I think about that night and the people I encountered. I learned the hard way that sometimes the road less traveled can lead to places best left unexplored. I still drive, but I'm always cautious and aware of my surroundings. The open road holds a thrill, but it can also hide dark secrets that are best left undiscovered.